Jaime Lannister stood before the great hall of Winterfell, the ancient banners of direwolves staring back at him, draped in the flickering torchlight. The snow had begun to fall again, gentler now, but still persistent, as if the north itself offered an ongoing reminder of its relentless and unyielding nature. He inhaled, catching the crisp air in his lungs. Something about the cold made his chest feel lighter, as though each breath carved a path through the weight he had carried for so many years. A hush had settled over the courtyard, men and women alike watching, wondering how the Kingslayer would fare in a land where the memory of Stark blood was so raw and painful. Yet here he stood, a man of the South, who had once worn shining gold armor, ready to assume the title of Warden of the North. He never imagined he would be here, and certainly not under these circumstances. Over the last moons, the realm had been plunged into chaos. The wars and the fight against the dead had changed everything. Friendships that should never have existed were forged. Old oaths were broken or set aflame. Jaime had ridden north for the sake of honor, and found himself changed by the gloom of the endless nights, and by the austere fortitude of the people who lived here. Sansa Stark, Queen in the North, had made her choice to name him Warden, a choice that many doubted. But she believed he had the mettle and the will to keep the North safe, and perhaps, she thought, it was time the realm witnessed a Lannister truly atoning for past crimes. As Jaime waited for the final pronouncement, his single hand flexed inside the thick glove, remembering how it felt when he first lost his sword hand. Now, he was more comfortable using his left hand than he ever thought possible, but a phantom tingling still haunted him. At his side stood Brienne of Tarth, tall and resolute, her broad shoulders clad in dark mail that seemed to blend into the shadows of the hall's edges. She was there perhaps to guard him, or perhaps to guard Winterfell from him. He was never entirely sure. But over time, he had come to depend on her presence as one might rely on the dawn after a bitter, endless night. Her gaze flicked toward him, stern yet somehow comforting. She wore her duty like a second skin, and Jaime found that he wore the memory of their shared bond the same way, invisible yet profoundly real. Queen Sansa sat upon a dais, not quite a throne but certainly a seat of command. Her auburn hair was plaited intricately, and her bearing was regal, reminiscent of her mother, but with a colder, sharper edge shaped by adversity. To her right stood Arya, silent as a cat, and to her left, in a place of honor, the Lady of Winterfell's most trusted advisors watched Jaime's every breath. The hush grew until it seemed all the North was holding its breath. A crier stepped forward, unrolling a scroll with shaking fingers. His voice echoed as he declared Jaime Lannister to be Warden of the North, naming his duties and responsibilities, and enumerating the authority bestowed upon him to gather armies and defend the lands from any threat that might arise. When the crier fell silent, Jaime felt a deep sensation in his gut, a swirl of conflicting emotions, pride, relief, and a tinge of fear. The fear was not for himself but for the people who would rely on him. He was no Stark, and the North held long grudges. Some might forever see him as the man who nearly killed Brandon Stark, the man who betrayed the king he had sworn to protect, the man who wore too much gold on his soul. But perhaps there was a different story to tell now, something new to forge in the ice and steel of this land. He bowed to Sansa, bending the knee in a gesture that carried a certain finality, acknowledging her as queen and himself as her sworn protector. Then he rose, meeting her eyes. An understanding passed between them. This was a gamble, but they would take it together. It was not lost on him that Brienne of Tarth was named his co-regent of sorts, or at least, an equal in authority when it came to matters of defense. It was her presence that softened the looks of so many in the courtyard. Though they did not trust a Lannister, many had witnessed Brienne fight for them, stand for them, bleed for them. And if Brienne vouched for this man, well, perhaps that was reason enough for cautious acceptance. She gave him a nod and he steeled himself, turning to address the crowd. He spoke words he never thought he would utter in the heart of Stark country. He promised to serve, to defend Winterfell, to keep faith with Queen Sansa, and to honor the memory of Ned Stark, a man he had maligned for so long in the South. A few voices in the back coughed or muttered, but no one openly protested. For the moment, that was as much as he could hope for. They had told him earlier that the North did not kneel easily. Jaime understood that in every fiber. The North was unlike the South, harsh yet strangely honest. Its people did not bend for power or gold, They bent for loyalty and honor. Those were virtues Jaime had trampled underfoot in his youth, virtues that had found him again through a series of humbling events. Glancing at Brienne, he felt a surge of gratitude that she stood there beside him. If his life had taken a different turn, if he had never met her, he would not be here. The irony was that he had lost a hand but gained a sense of purpose. He would do right by these people, if only to prove to himself he was capable of being the knight he once dreamed he could be. Night fell fully, and with it came the feast. Inside the great hall, tables were laden with the best Winterfell could offer. Roasts of venison, fresh bread, dark meat, and honey cakes. The fires roared in the great hearths, casting dancing shadows upon the stone walls. The swirl of conversation and the clink of cups created a tapestry of sound that Jaime observed from his seat near the dais. He was honored, but also on display. He could feel the weight of 100 eyes measuring him. He ate little, sipping occasionally from his goblet as the men and women around him devoured their meal. Across from him, Brienne ate with typical practicality, but Jaime noticed she was careful not to drink too much. Her sense of duty rarely rested, and perhaps she feared letting her guard down in this environment. From time to time, well-wishers or curious onlookers approached Jaime. A few northerners, mostly younger knights or ladies, came to see the infamous Kingslayer up close, to test him with subtle barbs or questions about the wars. He kept his composure, speaking politely, even kindly. Others avoided him entirely, though their eyes lingered. Eventually, a soft voice spoke from behind him. He turned to find Lady Arya Stark. She moved so quietly that Jaime never heard her approach. Her eyes were as sharp as any blade, and a faint smile tugged at her lips. "It's strange to see you here," she said, her tone betraying little emotion, "but stranger things have happened." Jaime inclined his head. "Indeed, milady. Strange times call for strange alliances. I only hope I can serve the North well." Arya stared at him for a moment, as if dissecting him with her keen gaze. "Brienne believes in you." That was all she said before turning and disappearing into the throng of revelers. He exhaled. It was a small thing, but hearing that from Arya even indirectly carried weight. Jaime glanced at Brienne, who met his eyes with a questioning look, and he simply shook his head to indicate nothing was amiss. As the evening wore on, Sansa rose to retire, and with her departure, a small exodus of highborn followed. Jaime stood as well. He felt the night's tension in his shoulders, so he decided to walk it off around the courtyard, hoping the chill wind would help him clear his mind. Brienne followed him outside, each step falling into place beside his. He'd grown used to her looming presence over time, and he found it oddly comforting. Outside, the snow had thickened, blanketing the courtyard in pale white that glimmered under the torchlight. Torchbearers walked the walls, ensuring the gates and ramparts were secure. The wind carried the distant howl of wolves, a reminder that the North was never truly silent. "You spoke well today," Brienne said at last, her voice subdued as they strolled along the outer wall. "I tried," Jaime replied. "I'm not sure how much they believed, but at least they heard my words." "They did." She paused, letting the crisp air fill the silence between them. "The North will test you. They'll look for any weakness, any betrayal. Give them nothing to doubt." A half-smile tugged at Jaime's lips. "Wise advice from the Maid of Tarth, though it was never my intent to betray the realm, you know." She nodded. "I know. But intentions matter less than actions to these people. You'll have to prove it day after day." He stopped, looking up at the ramparts. Snow clung to the stone, forming little drifts that the wind nudged around. "I hope there will be time to prove it in peace," he said, voice low. "After all this war, I imagine the realm could use a quiet decade or two." Brienne's face softened, and in that moment, Jaime saw her weariness. She had fought the War of the Five Kings, then the battles against the dead, and everything in between. It was remarkable she still stood. "Peace is precious," she murmured. "We must be ready to defend it." They reached an overlook where Winterfell's courtyard spread out below, the torchlights resembling dim stars scattered across an expanse of white. Jaime leaned against the cold stone, gingerly resting his weight on his golden prosthetic hand. The memory of losing his hand flitted through his mind unbidden, but he brushed it aside. That was the past, and tonight was about forging a future. "Brienne," he said softly, Thank you for standing with me. She turned, surprise flickering across her features. We've fought side by side before, she replied, as if that were explanation enough. I know the man you are, Jaime, not just the stories they tell about you. He let that settle, and in the hush that followed, he felt something shift between them. It wasn't romance in the typical sense, but it was trust, acknowledgement of a bond forged in fires of hardship and tempered by mutual respect. He wanted to say more, but words felt clumsy. Instead, he placed his good hand lightly on her arm, a gesture that conveyed more than his voice could manage. She did not pull away. At length, they made their way back inside, mindful of the watchful eyes. The north was full of stories, some whispered, some shouted, and Jaime had no desire to become fresh gossip fodder, especially not on his first official night as warden. Still, he found himself keenly aware of Brienne's presence as they parted ways in the corridor. She to a small chamber near the guards' quarters, he to a more spacious room befitting his new station. The night stretched out before them, and he felt a heaviness in anticipation, as though the next day would be the start of a trial that might last the rest of his life. When morning came, it arrived in a haze of pale sunlight struggling through laden clouds. The crisp air bit at Jaime's cheeks, as he dressed in a simpler attire than the gold and crimson finery he had once favored. Here, he wore muted grays and blues, a respectful nod to the Norse palette. At his hip, he wore his sword, one of the Valyrian steel blades reforged from ice. Each time he remembered its origin, a pang of guilt and resolve mixed within him, spurring him on to prove that the metal's legacy would not be tarnished by a Lannister's hand. His duties as warden began at once. He inspected the courtyard where soldiers of various banners trained. Many were still battered from the war against the dead, and some were newly recruited. He exchanged few words, preferring to observe before making judgments. He saw a man with a burn scar down his cheek, a younger soldier missing 2 fingers, an older knight whose hair had gone white with the terror of battles. They all bore the marks of war. There was a fragile unity among them, a camaraderie that came from surviving unthinkable horrors. Jaime recognized it from his own experiences on the battlefield. He decided he would maintain that spirit, keep them alert, keep them united. By midday he met with Lady Sansa and her council in the Solar. A large map of the north was spread on a sturdy table, marked with quill ink notes. Various lords stood around, some frowning, some nodding as they discussed concerns. Crops had been ravaged by the prolonged winter, and though the worst of it was over, many villages needed supplies. There were also rumors of Ironborn raiders along the coast near Torhin Square. Sansa's voice carried a confident authority as she laid out these issues. Then all eyes turned to Jaime, expecting the warden to provide answers. He cleared his throat. We should bolster patrols along the coast. Let the Lord of Torrin Square know he can call upon the crown for aid, and I will personally see to it that fresh garrisons are supplied if the Ironborn attempt more raids. As for the villages, he paused, looking at the map. We'll need to organize a supply chain from Winterfell's stores, send ravens to White Harbor. Many ships were redirected from the war effort and may be free now to transport grains. Also, we need blacksmiths and masons to help rebuild the damaged holdfasts before the next winter sets in. Some of the northern lords regarded him with guarded approval, others with skepticism. But no one outright objected, and Sansa nodded. Good. We'll formalize these steps. My steward will coordinate with the Master of Coin. We can't leave our people defenseless now that they've suffered so much. No. The meeting continued, dealing with matters of roads and trade. Every solution was complex, layered with the North's vast distances and harsh climate. Eventually, they spoke of the Night's Watch, still in need of resources to rebuild the wall's defenses after the war with the dead. Even though the immediate threat was gone, the realm did not want to be caught unprepared. Jaime realized how far he had come from the days when he dismissed the North and its concerns as trifling. Now, he was immersed in them, shaped by them. Afternoon sunlight angled through the high windows, casting patterns across the floor. When the council finally ended, Jaime felt drained, but a spark of energy kept him upright. Every problem was a challenge that he wanted to meet. One by one the lords departed, leaving Jaime alone with Sansa. She studied him from behind the table, her fingers steepled before her. Thank you, she said softly. For taking this seriously, some men in your position would see this as an honorary title and return to the south. He gave a half smile. I don't run from my responsibilities anymore, Your Grace. I might have once, but not now. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. Times change. People change. She paused, measuring her words. I'm aware the North is suspicious of your appointment. It was the same for me when I first returned home, after all I'd been through. They wondered if I was truly a Stark anymore, or just some Southerner's pawn, but in time they came to trust me because I did what needed to be done for them. Do the same, and you'll find acceptance, or something close enough. He nodded, gratitude in his voice. Thank you, Your Grace. I appreciate the counsel. She rose, leaving him to gather his thoughts. He lingered a moment, gazing at the map. The names of the keeps and small towns became more than markings on parchment. They were now his responsibility, a mosaic of northern life he had to protect. Yes, he had fought for King's Landing once, but that was different. There, the politics were a viper's nest of manipulation. Here, in the stark light and brutal cold, things felt more real. The stakes were simpler: survive, endure, protect one another. He left the solar and descended into the courtyard, deciding to inspect the ramparts. As he walked, he heard the ring of steel on steel, saw men training with swords, axes, and spears. Some bowed in acknowledgement, though wariness still lingered in their eyes. He greeted them with a nod. One of them, a young man with black hair, approached. My lord, I'd like to learn a move or two from you. They say you were the best swordsman in the realm. Jaime tensed, feeling the phantom sensation of his lost hand. Once, he might have basked in the compliment. Now, he felt it like a bittersweet echo. That was a long time ago, he said, voice measured. But I'll do what I can. They squared off in a small practice yard. A crowd quickly gathered to watch. Jaime took up a wooden sword in his left hand, adjusting to its balance. The onlookers whispered among themselves, some no doubt eager to see him fail. He felt the tension coiling in his gut. This, too, was a test. With an inhale, he allowed muscle memory to guide him, even if it was memory learned with his weaker hand. Over the past years, he had trained relentlessly, adapting to his disability. Though he would never be the legendary swordsman he once was, he was still formidable. The young man struck first, swinging at Jaime's midsection. Jaime deflected, stepping aside with a fluidity he'd honed through daily practice. He responded with a controlled counter, not wanting to injure the lad, but enough to showcase his skill. Wood clacked against wood. Despite the cold, sweat beaded on his brow. The watchers leaned in, eyes gleaming with curiosity. Jaime maintained a tight defense, occasionally feinting to test the young man's reflexes. Finally, after several exchanges, he pressed a bit harder, forcing the lad to yield. Panting, the young man lowered his sword, his expression a blend of frustration and respect. Thank you, my lord, he said, bowing. Jaime offered a nod, stepping back. The hush broke, and murmurs spread among the onlookers. He saw a few impressed smiles. A faint tension drained from him. Though he wasn't the Kingslayer he once was in terms of raw skill, he had earned at least a measure of acknowledgement here. It was a small victory, but these days, small victories mattered. By evening, Jaime was back in the Great Hall. Dinner was simpler than the feast of the prior night, but still hearty. He ate at Sansa's table, discussing further details of supply routes. The talk was practical, focusing on how to ration their stores until the next harvest. At one point, a raven arrived bearing news from the Vale, which Sansa read quietly, her brows knitting with concern. Jaime didn't pry. He knew well enough that not all matters were his to handle. He excused himself when the meal was done, heading back to his chambers to finalize the day's notes. Winterfell felt endless. So many corridors and staircases, so many towers. He passed by a long hall where the crypts lay below, a place filled with the statues of Stark ancestors. The Old North seemed to breathe through these stones. He wondered what they would think, these ancient lords of ice and snow, about a Lannister overseeing their domain. He decided it was best not to dwell on it. His chambers were warm, the fire already lit. He eased off his boots, feeling the day's fatigue in his bones. Setting his sword aside, he moved to a small writing desk. A quill and parchment waited for him. He began to scribble notes, tasks for the next day, details about patrols and potential alliances. Time slipped by, and the only sound was the soft crackle of the hearth. He found an odd peace in this routine, a sense of purpose that quieted the chaos in his mind. When he finally set down the quill, hours had passed. A light rap came at his door. He turned, somewhat startled, and called for whoever it was to enter. The door creaked open to reveal Brienne. She wore plain woolen clothes, her hair still slightly damp from washing. Jaime stood, feeling a flutter of something he couldn't quite name. "Apologies for the late hour," she said, stepping inside. "I wanted to check on you. It's been a long day." A soft smile touched his lips. "I'm still in one piece, as you can see. No northerners have chopped off my other hand yet." She gave him a mild look that suggested she wasn't entirely amused by his jest. "How do you find your duties so far?" "It's, much. But I welcome it. Feels good to work for something more than my family's glory." Brienne nodded, her broad shoulders shifting as she stood near the fire. The dancing flames highlighted the scars on her hands, mementos of the many battles she'd survived. "I remember how you were when I first met you," she said softly, a note of nostalgia in her voice. "You've changed." He let out a breath. "You helped change me." Her eyes flicked to his, and for a moment, their gazes locked. In the hush of that moment, the swirling tension that had defined much of their shared history seemed to crystallize into something warm and unexpected. Neither of them said another word. There was no need for thanks or apologies, not anymore. She cleared her throat gently. "I'll leave you to your rest." As she turned to go, he caught her hand briefly. The touch was gentle, hesitant, yet it spoke volumes. "Stay a moment," he said, voice quieter than he intended. Maybe we could talk about plans for tomorrow's training." She studied him, reading more in his eyes than his words revealed. "All right," she said, stepping back from the door and letting it close behind her. They spoke for nearly an hour, half about official matters, troop drills, guard rotations, and half about nothing in particular. The weather, how the North's summer was still colder than the South's winter, how the cook's honeyed biscuits tasted almost too sweet. Eventually she departed, and Jaime was left with a curious warmth that outlasted the fire. The next weeks followed a pattern that became comfortable, days filled with the duties of a warden, inspections, councils, planning for the winter's end and the next harvest, and evenings sometimes punctuated by quiet talks with Brienne or more official gatherings in the Great Hall. To his surprise, some of the northern lords began to open up, presenting him with their grievances and seeking his judgments. He listened carefully, mindful not to tread on local customs. He let them see that his judgments were fair, that he wasn't simply a Lannister imposing southern views on them. A rumor spread that bandits had taken refuge near the Wolfswood, harassing travelers along a narrow pass. Jaime, deciding he needed to show leadership through action, assembled a small contingent to investigate. Winterfell guards, along with a handful of local bannermen, rode out. The wind bit at their faces and the path was slick with half-melted snow. Jaime felt the tension in every breath, uncertain what they would find. Brienne rode beside him, silent and watchful. They discovered a ragtag group of outlaws holed up in a cave, men who had once been part of the northern armies but deserted in the face of famine and desperation. They had turned to robbery to survive. When Jaime confronted them, they snarled and raised their weapons, but hunger and despair were etched in their faces. A skirmish broke out, steel clashing in the snowy clearing. Jaime fought with measured skill, focusing on disarming rather than killing. By his side, Brienne moved like a thunderbolt, her sword swift and precise. In the end, a handful of outlaws surrendered, dropping to their knees in the snow. One of them, a middle-aged man with hollow cheeks, pleaded for mercy. Jaime studied them, weighing their plight. He ordered that they be taken back to Winterfell in chains, but also ordered that they be fed and given a chance to explain themselves before Sansa's court. This display of both firmness and compassion did not go unnoticed by the northern men who accompanied him. Returning to Winterfell under a bleak sky, Jaime felt the sting of the wind but also a certain pride. It wasn't a triumphant moment. He had faced bigger battles, more dangerous foes. But it was a moment where he realized that being Warden of the North was not about grand gestures. It was about dealing with the small tragedies and the everyday survival of people who had seen too much hardship. When he handed the prisoners over to the guards in the courtyard, men nodded at him with something close to respect. Time pressed on. The days lengthened, bringing a teasing hint of spring. Roads grew muddied, and melted snow turned fields into a patchwork of slush and ice. Merchants started to trickle into Winterfell, bringing goods from the Neck and beyond. Jaime oversaw an effort to clear the roads, to ensure safe passage for trade caravans. These were the unglamorous tasks of rulership, but he pursued them diligently. One evening, after a long day of hearing petitions, Jaime found Brienne in the practice yard, drilling with a group of young knights. He watched her correct their stances, demonstrate a parry, and walk them through footwork. Some of them looked awestruck, never having trained under a woman, much less one with her prowess. When she spotted him, she gave a curt nod. He strode over, feeling the eyes of the knights shift between them. "Warden," Brienne said, a hint of teasing in her tone. "Care to join us?" A small chuckle escaped him. "I might slow you down, Sir Brienne." "Doubtful," she replied, stepping aside to let him pick a practice sword. He did so, and they faced off, drawing a circle of onlookers. The younger knights watched with bated breath, excited to see a friendly clash between two warriors of renown. The first clash of their wooden blades echoed through the courtyard. Jaime felt that old thrill of challenge. Brienne came at him with a measured strike, which he parried with surprising ease. He countered, trying to slip past her guard, but she pivoted with impressive speed, stepping aside. Their movements were like a dance, each step a conversation between two swords. Jaime felt the strain in his left arm, but also a certain exhilaration. Memories of their time on the road, as reluctant companions and foes, flashed in his mind. Brienne pressed him and he was forced back. He feinted high, then aimed low, but she caught the trick and blocked. A grin formed on Jaime's lips as they exchanged a series of swift blows, neither yielding an inch. The onlookers gasped at the display. Finally, Brienne saw an opening, a small vulnerability in his stance, and delivered a strike that would have cut him down had it been real steel. Jaime skidded, halting just before her sword tip. He swallowed, catching his breath, then lowered his own weapon. "Well done," he managed, voice slightly breathless. "I yield." A faint smile touched Brienne's lips, but she said nothing. The knights around them clapped, some cheering. Jaime observed their awe, and he realized this was part of what made Brienne so respected. Her undeniable skill and unwavering honor. She turned to address the young knights, explaining what had happened in the final exchange and how they could learn from it. Jaime watched her with a sense of admiration that went beyond mere respect for her swordsmanship. In the following days, life in Winterfell continued its slow but steady rhythm. Letters arrived from various corners of the north, some announcing small crises, others bearing tidings of births, alliances, or trade proposals. Jaime delegated tasks to those who knew the land best, but made sure to remain personally involved in crucial decisions. He developed a cautious friendship with some of the northerners, men and women who realized he was earnest in his efforts. Still, there were others who kept their distance, reluctant to trust a Lannister. Jaime didn't begrudge them. He knew trust wasn't won overnight. Sometimes he would pass by the courtyard and see the direwolf banners flapping in the breeze, a constant reminder of whose land this truly was. He thought of Ned Stark, the man whose memory still haunted these walls. Jaime wondered what Ned would think of him now. Part of him hoped that, wherever his spirit might be, Ned Stark saw that a Lannister could honor something greater than himself. As the nights grew milder, word reached them of a disturbance at the edge of the Gift, near one of the old abandoned castles of the Night's Watch. Reports spoke of shadowy figures raiding homesteads, stealing livestock, and disappearing into the night. Some believed it to be wildlings who had crossed over. Others whispered of darker forces that refused to die, even after the long night's end. Sansa looked to Jaime, and Jaime looked to Brienne. Together they decided they would ride out and investigate, taking a company of Winterfell men. A few days later, they set off at dawn. The chill air was invigorating, the sky a pale gray streaked with pink. Jaime rode at the head of the column, Brienne beside him, and behind them marched 24 riders, well armed and alert. Their breath turned to mist as they exhaled, and the horses' hooves crunched against frozen ground that was only just beginning to thaw. They headed north, past the last farms and small hamlets, into the rougher terrain that edged closer to the wall. The Gift was sparsely populated, dotted with crumbling watchtowers and old roads that had fallen into disrepair. As they journeyed, Jaime watched the landscape shift. The trees grew taller, darker, and the wind picked up, whistling through the branches like a distant lament. At night they camped beneath a sky strewn with stars, the howling of wolves echoing in the distance. The men huddled around fires, telling stories to keep their spirits high. Some talked of the war against the dead, recounting horrors they had witnessed. Others spoke of simpler dreams, like returning home to a warm hearth and a loving family. Jaime listened quietly, reminded once again of the resilience of these people. On the third day, they reached an abandoned holdfast that had once belonged to the Watch. Thick drifts of snow piled against broken walls, and the gate hung ajar, rusted from neglect. Brienne dismounted first, sword drawn. Jaime followed suit, scanning the area for signs of life. They found the holdfast eerily empty, though footprints in the snow suggested recent activity. Searching the courtyard, they discovered makeshift beds, discarded firewood, and evidence of stolen livestock. A sense of disquiet settled over them. Whoever had been here was either gone or hiding nearby. They moved to the keep's interior, stepping over debris. The floors were rotted in places, and the windows were nothing but jagged holes. Soft echoes of their footsteps filled the corridors. Suddenly, a shout rang out from one of Jaime's men. Jaime rushed toward the noise, sword in hand, Brienne at his side. They found themselves face to face with a group of wildlings, ragged and armed with spears and axes. Their eyes were wide with fear and desperation. A tense standoff ensued. One of the wildlings, a tall woman with a scarred cheek, growled that this was their shelter now. They claimed they were forced to flee due to a harsh leader north of the wall, an upstart who would not accept peace. Brienne tried to reason with them, speaking calmly. Jaime kept his sword at the ready, mindful that a single spark could ignite bloodshed. Negotiations were fraught. The wildlings suspected the Southerners of betrayal, and the men from Winterfell eyed the wildlings with deep suspicion. Memories of battles past echoed in every stare. Eventually, Brienne's steady words broke through. She convinced them that they could come to Winterfell peacefully, or at least move on without further raids. One of the older wildlings spat, saying they couldn't trust kneelers. But the scarred woman hesitated, glancing at her companions who clutched half-frozen bundles of furs and meager supplies. They were hungry, clearly exhausted. Jaime stepped forward, his voice surprisingly gentle. He offered them a chance, lay down their weapons and take shelter in the gift under the protection of the Queen in the north. In time, they might earn a place among the free folk who had chosen to settle in the realm's outskirts. Warily, they agreed, lowering their weapons, though the tension in the air remained thick. They escorted the wildlings out of the holdfast, guiding them south. On the return journey, Jaime saw how these men and women shivered in the cold, their clothes inadequate for deep winter. Despite his men's misgivings, he ordered blankets and extra rations to be shared. At first, the wildlings were wary of accepting, but hunger won out. They traveled in uneasy coexistence, glancing over their shoulders every so often, expecting betrayal. But none came. When they finally reached Winterfell, Sansa greeted them with her usual composed poise. Though she was not eager to fill the castle with more mouths to feed, she recognized the necessity of diplomacy. She assigned them to a small settlement near the outer fields, with a watchful guard to ensure they kept peace. Over time, they might integrate or choose to move on. Jaime felt relief that it hadn't ended in bloodshed. He also felt a creeping satisfaction in the back of his mind. This was the sort of delicate situation he might have once dismissed. But now he had resolved it with minimal violence, fulfilling his duty as warden. Perhaps he could truly belong here. That evening, the great hall was alive with chatter about the wildlings, with rumors flying as fast as arrows. Some lauded Jaime's mercy, others cursed it as foolishness. He tried not to let the murmurs get to him. Brienne joined him at the high table where he sat beside Sansa. Conversation turned to what it meant to hold power in a land scarred by wars. The gloom in the hall's corners seemed to reflect all the unspoken pain. Yet there was also a gentle light in the eyes of those who dared to hope for something better. After the meal, Jaime lingered by the hearth, swirling a cup of wine. Brienne stood beside him, her presence as solid as a tower. Softly, so only she could hear, he said, "We did well today." She nodded. "People see your heart, Jaime. Don't doubt that." He looked at her then, the fire dancing in her blue eyes. And yours, Brienne. Without you, none of this would be possible. Now he's. Her lips parted in a slight smile, and she placed a firm hand on his arm. They stood like that for a moment, letting the warmth of the fire and the glow of triumph wash over them. Whatever lay ahead, be it more bandits, political strife, or old grudges, it seemed they could face it together, so long as they remained steadfast. In the days and weeks that followed, life in Winterfell found a fragile rhythm again. Jaime continued to oversee the garrisons, ensuring the roads were safe. He managed disputes between minor lords, negotiated with merchants, and kept a close eye on the wildling settlement. Slowly, grudgingly, the North bent to his leadership, though it was less a bow and more a subtle nod of acknowledgement. Perhaps that was all he would ever receive, and it was enough. Occasionally, Jaime would slip away to the Godswood, seeking a moment's peace. The ancient weirwood stood in silent vigil, its carved face weeping red sap into the tranquil pool. It was in that secluded grove that he often found Brienne, quietly reflecting. They rarely spoke much there, but their silences were companionable. One day, as they stood beneath the red leaves, she asked him, "Do you ever regret coming here, taking on this title?" He considered her question carefully, breathing in the crisp scent of the Godswood. "I regret many things in my life," he said, "but this isn't one of them." She nodded, her expression contemplative. "Good. Because you're needed here." A hush fell, broken only by the faint rustle of leaves overhead. Jaime found himself studying the lines of her face, recalling how he once mocked her appearance and called her hateful names. Now he saw a warmth and strength that left him humbled. Tentatively, he reached out and took her hand, gloved as it was, in his own. She didn't pull away. The old weirwood bore silent witness to the wordless conversation that passed between them. Another moon passed, and with it came the first real signs of the North's short, mild spring. The ice began to recede and the rivers swelled with melted snow. Birds returned, their calls echoing over the battlements. People busied themselves with planting and repairs. Jaime supervised the construction of a new grain storehouse. He consulted with the blacksmiths on forging better plows for the fields. Slowly but surely, Winterfell was preparing to flourish once more. Though the nights were still cold, the Great Hall was often alive with music and laughter now, a stark contrast to the grim hush of past winters. One evening a traveling bard arrived, singing songs of old heroes. The halls filled with a sense of celebration, albeit subdued compared to southern feasts. Men who once eyed Jaime with distrust now shared toasts in his name. He accepted their goodwill modestly, remembering how tenuous acceptance could be. Afterward, Jaime found himself in a quiet corridor with Brienne. The echoes of music still drifted through the stone walls. He looked at her, a question in his eyes. "Walk with me?" he asked, and she agreed. They wound their way through the dimly lit passages until they emerged on the ramparts. The moon cast a silvery glow over the courtyard, and the wind carried the faint aroma of pine. He leaned against the cold stone, gazing out at the vast northern sky. Stars sparkled above them, and for a moment they simply stood side by side, letting the hush of night envelop them. "You've taken to the north quite well," Brienne remarked quietly. "When I first heard Sansa's plan to name you Warden, I worried how you'd fare." He chuckled softly. "I suspect many shared that worry, including myself. But it turns out there's something about the north that—" He paused, searching for the right words. "It strips away the pretenses. It forces you to confront who you are. No gilded armor to hide behind, no courtly illusions." "Now, Nene." Brienne nodded, the moonlight catching in her hair. "We've both seen how illusions crumble in the face of cold reality." A moment passed, charged with unspoken thoughts. He turned to her, noting how the starlight reflected in her eyes. "Brienne, I often wonder where I would be if I hadn't met you. Likely dead or lost in my old ways." She met his gaze unflinchingly. "We saved each other, Jaime." He exhaled, a soft puff of condensation visible in the chilly air. "I've done terrible things in my life. But being here, helping these people, it feels like a chance at redemption." "Naswai." Her grip tightened around the battlement's edge. "Redemption is a path, not a single act," and I believe you've chosen that path." He stepped closer to her, feeling the warmth of her presence against the cold wind. They were alone here, high above the courtyards where soldiers still patrolled and the city below slumbered. The hush of the night made his heartbeat seem deafening in his ears. Words faltered on his tongue, and instead, he simply reached out, letting his gloved fingers brush hers. She hesitated, but then her hand closed around his, the gesture electric in its significance. "Brienne," he whispered, voice barely carrying above the wind. "I." He didn't know how to finish that sentence, how to explain the swirl of gratitude, admiration, and something more tender that he felt. She gave a small nod, her face softening in a way few had ever seen. Their breath mingled in the icy air, and for an instant, time seemed to freeze. He thought of all the nights they had camped in the wilderness, all the times they had been at each other's throats, and all the battles they had survived. He thought of the look in her eyes when she talked about honor, how it always reminded him of the ideals he once held as a boy dreaming of knighthood. Gently, he bent forward, pressing his forehead to hers. The moment was delicate, fragile as a piece of spun glass. She did not pull away, and his heart pounded, a mix of nerves and hope. They stood like that, silent, communing in a language beyond words. Slowly, he pulled back, eyes locked with hers, the hush still stretching around them. The crisp air carried the quiet promise of spring, of renewal. And in that hush, Jaime felt the weight of a lifetime lift, just a fraction, replaced by the gravity of a new bond that terrified and exhilarated him in equal measure. In the days that followed, neither spoke directly of that moment on the ramparts, but something had shifted between them. Their companionship felt deeper, more intimate. They trained together, attended councils, and handled disputes as they always had, yet there was an unspoken warmth in every glance. The men and women of Winterfell began to notice too, though few dared to comment openly. Still, whispers found their way through the corridors. A few lords, particularly those from old northern families, eyed this budding closeness with apprehension. The memory of the War of the Five Kings lingered, and some worried about the politics of a Lannister forging a personal bond with a knight, rumored to be favored by the queen. Jaime heard the whispers, but he refused to let them deter him. The North was never quick to trust outsiders, and he expected no different. But he would not deny the quiet flame that had begun to burn between him and Brienne. One evening, while reviewing troop deployments with Sansa, the queen studied him with a keen gaze. "Jaime," she said calmly, "I hear my warden and my sworn shield have grown close. Should I be concerned?" He set aside the parchment. "Your Grace, Brienne is my ally, my friend." His voice faltered. "She has been for some time." Sansa merely raised an eyebrow. "I'm not criticizing, but understand that the North is sensitive to alliances, especially those that may affect the balance of power. Be mindful. And if you ask my personal opinion, Brienne deserves whatever happiness she can find." Jaime stood there, taken aback by her frankness. He bowed his head. "I appreciate your candor, Your Grace. I have no intention of upsetting any balance." She waved a hand dismissively. "It's your heart, Jaime, but we all have our duties." With that, she returned to the matter at hand as though the conversation had never deviated. He left the Solar feeling a mix of relief and caution. He decided that whatever lay ahead, he would tread carefully, balancing his responsibilities with the undeniable draw he felt toward Brienne. He recalled the lessons of the North: honesty, loyalty, and respect. In a land that gave no quarter to lies, he would be true to himself, and to her. Not long after, a raven arrived with news of tensions at the Dreadfort. The new Lord Bolton, a distant cousin of the old line, was struggling to maintain control over restless vassals who hated his name and house for its bloody past. Sansa ordered Jaime to go there, both to assert the crown's authority and to prevent the region from sliding into chaos. Without hesitation, Jaime prepared to depart, assembling a small retinue. Brienne volunteered to accompany him, as did a handful of other knights loyal to Winterfell. They set out, riding east under a gunmetal sky. The land around the Dreadfort was bleak, its soil dark and its waters sluggish. The looming fortress, once infamous for its torture chambers, now seemed subdued in the faint daylight, its banners fluttering weakly. Jaime felt a chill that had nothing to do with the climate. Memories of the Boltons' cruelty haunted the North, and trust was scarcer here than anywhere else. Inside the great hall of the Dreadfort, they were met by a man in his middle years with thinning hair and a cautious demeanor. He introduced himself as Lord Aaron Bolton, acknowledging that his house had a dark legacy but claiming he wished to right past wrongs. Jaime studied him intently, looking for any sign of deception. Bolton insisted on hosting a feast, but the atmosphere was tense, as though ghosts lingered in every corner. The night of the feast, Jaime observed the wary glances of the local lords. Their words were polite, but it was clear they were testing him, a Lannister in the seat of House Bolton. Brienne sat by his side, her presence a welcome anchor. Halfway through the meal, a minor lord, surly with drink, spoke up with a pointed sneer. He questioned whether a Lannister could truly protect the North given its history with House Stark. The hall fell silent, forks pausing midair. Jaime felt the heat rise in his chest, but he mastered his anger. "My past is stained, I won't deny that," he said, voice steady. "But the blood we've all spilled fighting the dead made us allies. I stand by the Queen in the North, and my sole purpose here is to keep this land safe. If my word is not enough, let my deeds speak for me." A flicker of grudging respect passed over some faces. The surly lord grunted but said nothing further. Lord Bolton cleared his throat, hastily diverting the conversation. By the feast's end, tensions remained, but open hostility had been averted. Still, Jaime couldn't shake the feeling that the Dreadfort was a tinderbox waiting for a spark. Over the next few days, he and Brienne worked to ease tensions, meeting with local leaders and ensuring the Dreadfort soldiers would not trouble neighboring lands. Bolton seemed cooperative, but there was an undercurrent of uncertainty in everything he said or did. On the final night, as Jaime was preparing to retire, a frantic servant rushed to his chambers, stammering that a group of brigands had attacked a nearby village. They claimed the Bolton name, and the villagers blamed the Lord for failing to rein them in. Jaime immediately called Brienne and their knights, and they rode out under cover of darkness, guided by the terrified servant. The village was a miserable sight. Houses burned, livestock scattered, and villagers cowering in fear. They found the brigands in the remains of a barn, drunk on stolen ale, boasting about how the Boltons would reclaim their infamous power. Jaime's blood ran cold. This was the exact scenario he feared, remnants of the old Bolton cruelty rising again. A swift, brutal fight ensued. Jaime and Brienne led the charge. The brigands, caught unawares, fought back with savage desperation, but they were outnumbered and disorganized. Jaime blocked a wild swing, countering with a thrust that disarmed his opponent. Brienne's blade flashed in the moonlight, dispatching two brigands who lunged at her. Soon, the band lay broken or dead, the village's once silent night echoing with the groans of the wounded. In the aftermath, Jaime helped a wounded villager to his feet, asking what had happened. The man spat blood and accused the Boltons of orchestrating this for terror and control. Jaime frowned, uncertain whether it was true or if these were mere bandits abusing the Bolton name. Either way, he knew the North would not stand for more Bolton atrocities. This needed to be addressed quickly and decisively. They returned to the Dreadfort at dawn, dragging the captured brigands in tow. Lord Bolton looked pale and shaken, swearing on his house name that he had no part in the raid. Jaime met his gaze, weighing his words. A part of him wanted to believe that Bolton was sincere, that he could turn a new leaf. Another part of him remembered the horrors inflicted by Roose and Ramsay Bolton and suspected the roots of cruelty ran too deep in that lineage. Under Jaime's supervision, the brigands were interrogated. Some claimed allegiance to the Bolton name, though it was unclear whether Lord Aaron truly sanctioned them, or if they acted independently. Regardless, Jaime insisted on swift justice, executing those who had perpetrated the violence. Lord Bolton did not protest, though a shadow haunted his eyes. With the culprits dealt with, Jaime demanded that Bolton double his patrols and prove his loyalty to Winterfell by stamping out any remnant that clung to the old terror. Reluctantly, Bolton agreed. Jaime left the Dreadfort with mixed feelings, uncertain if he had truly resolved the matter, or merely delayed an inevitable resurgence of that house's infamous cruelty. Still, he had done all he could within the bounds of his authority. Returning to Winterfell, he filed a thorough report to Sansa, advising caution and further scrutiny of the Boltons. By the time he and Brienne rode through Winterfell's gates, Exhaustion weighed on them. The night sky was soft with a faint glow, and the walls of the castle offered a familiar sense of safety. Jaime dismounted, his muscles aching from the long ride, and handed his reins to a stable boy. Brienne did the same, rolling her shoulders to ease the tension. Sansa, informed of their arrival, met them in the courtyard, accompanied by a few guards. Her gaze was steady, though concern flickered in her eyes. "Welcome back," she said simply. "Your report is troubling. We can't allow the Bolton name to spread fear again." "No." Jaime bowed. "I've done what I can to contain it for now, Your Grace, but I advise vigilance." Brienne concurred. "I believe Lord Aeron tries to be different, but he cannot control all those who cling to the old ways." Sansa nodded, her expression unreadable. "Rest now. We'll speak more on this in the morning." Jaime and Brienne shared a look, each aware of the tension that gripped the north like a hidden frost beneath the snow melt. The realm might never be entirely free of shadows. Yet, here they were, doing their part to hold back the darkness. For Jaime, the irony was stark. Once he had been the darkness himself, in the eyes of many. Now he stood against it in a land not his own, but a land he had come to care for deeply. Early the next day, they assembled with Sansa and her advisors, discussing how best to handle the Bolton issue. Some argued for removing Lord Aeron entirely, placing a more trustworthy banner in his stead. Others worried that such a move would spark renewed rebellion from old Bolton loyalists. Sansa listened intently, occasionally glancing at Jaime, whose opinion held considerable weight. By the meeting's end, it was decided that a formal delegation from Winterfell would remain at the Dreadfort, overseeing the region's governance and ensuring no more atrocities took place. Jaime silently approved. Strong oversight might prevent further bloodshed without stoking a larger rebellion. After the council dispersed, Jaime found himself alone with Sansa once more. She thanked him for his service, her demeanor formal yet sincere. He inclined his head, feeling a curious mixture of pride and humility. The North was not an easy place, yet he found purpose here. As he turned to leave, Sansa's voice stopped him. "Sir Jaime," she said, watching him with thoughtful eyes. "You've proven you can lead. You've protected my people. For that I owe you a debt. But remember, the North never forgets, either betrayal or loyalty." He nodded slowly. "I understand, Your Grace." She gave a faint, approving smile. "Good. We'll speak again soon." Days turned into weeks, the routine of rule settling around Jaime like a well-worn cloak. He found himself busier than ever, yet oddly content. He enforced Sansa's directives, balanced the needs of the local lords, and continually prepared for any threat that might arise, be it from wildlings, bandits, or the uneasy remnants of the Bolton legacy. As winter receded further, the land seemed to breathe again, the fields greening, and the air growing warmer. Hope, though tentative, blossomed. In the midst of these responsibilities, Jaime's closeness with Brienne flourished in quiet moments. They sparred in the training yard, discussing tactics and strategy, their camaraderie laced with an underlying affection that neither spoke outright, but both felt. Sometimes, they would walk the castle walls at dusk, sharing stories of distant memories. Other times they simply sat in companionable silence, content to be near each other. For Jaime, it was a solace he had never expected to find, especially not in the north. One evening, after finalizing some reports, he found Brienne in the Godswood, as was often her wont. The sky was streaked with deep oranges and purples, and the weirwood's leaves glowed crimson in the fading light. She stood by the pool, her reflection wavering on the still surface. Jaime approached, careful not to disturb her reverie. "You always come here," he said softly, standing beside her. "What do you find in this place?" She gazed at the ancient face carved into the trunk. "Peace, reflection, a connection to a faith I'm not sure I fully understand, but respect nonetheless." He nodded, letting her words soak in. Silence stretched between them, the only sound the gentle rustling of leaves in the evening breeze. Then, as if guided by a force beyond them, they turned to face each other. The light caught the planes of her face, illuminating her strength and vulnerability all at once. Jaime reached out, his heart thudding in his chest, and lightly touched her cheek. "Brienne," he began, voice thick with emotion, but she silenced him with a soft press of her fingers to his lips. In that hush, they leaned toward each other, the deepening twilight enveloping them in a gentle cloak. Their lips met, tentative at first, then with growing certainty. Time seemed to stand still. The Godswood became a realm of its own, where past shadows could not enter, and only the present moment mattered. When they finally broke apart, breathless, their eyes locked, each finding something they had long sought. A kind of acceptance, a bond that transcended the burdens of titles and histories. They did not speak of love, nor did they make any grand declarations. They simply were two warriors who had walked through hell and emerged with a shared sense of honor, and now a blossoming tenderness. The North, in its austere beauty, had carved them both anew, forging something stronger than the sum of their scars. When they exited the Godswood, the night sky was thick with stars. Hand in hand, they navigated the winding paths back to the castle proper. As they passed through the courtyard, they exchanged a quick, knowing glance, aware that their newfound closeness might draw attention. But in that moment, Jaime cared little for court gossip or the suspicious gazes of a few onlookers. He felt an uncharacteristic lightness in his chest, a sense that he was where he was meant to be. Over the following weeks, whispers spread throughout Winterfell. The Maid of Tarth and the Kingslayer had grown more than companions in arms. Jaime noticed the curious stares, but the overall reaction was surprisingly mild. Perhaps the people here, having lived through the horrors of war, recognized that life was too short to deny the stirrings of the heart. Or maybe it was a testament to the respect both warriors had earned. Sansa said nothing directly, but from the small smiles she offered Brienne in council sessions, Jaime guessed the Queen approved. Still, duty loomed large. Petty squabbles between lords needed settling, the watch on the Bolton lands had to be maintained, and trade routes to White Harbor required oversight. Jaime found himself coordinating with Lord Glover and Lord Serwyn, discussing how best to rebuild war-torn villages. Food stores were slowly replenishing, and the northern roads bustled with caravans. The realm took on a sense of cautious optimism, like a battered fighter discovering he could still stand. It wasn't all smooth. Tensions flared in remote areas. Old vendettas reared their heads, and occasionally, a raven would bring troubling news of raids or robberies. But Jaime met each challenge head-on, supported by Brienne's steadfast presence and Sansa's guidance. Little by little he won over skeptics. Not because he demanded their loyalty, but because he earned it. The North's grudges might run deep, but so too did its grudging respect for a man who kept his word. One afternoon Jaime was in the armory, discussing improvements to the castle's stockpile of weapons with the master smith. The conversation was cut short by the sound of frantic footsteps. A messenger rushed in, panting, holding a small scroll sealed with the sigil of the Night's Watch. Jaime took it with a sense of foreboding. Breaking the seal, he scanned the contents quickly, his eyes narrowing. He turned to Brienne, who had come in moments before, as though she sensed trouble. "We have a problem," he said, voice taut. "A party of exiled wildlings, real troublemakers it seems, has attacked a watch patrol. The survivors fled back to Castle Black. They're requesting assistance." "Wow." Brienne frowned, crossing her arms. "Do you think it's part of a larger threat?" "Could be," he replied grimly. "Or it might just be desperate raiders. Either way, it's our duty to handle it before it escalates." He wasted no time. Gathering a contingent of knights and seasoned fighters, Jaime prepared for yet another journey northward. Sansa approved the expedition, urging caution. She also insisted on sending some of her own men, ensuring Winterfell's banner was clearly represented. Within 2 days, they rode out, a grim determination settling over them like a cloak. The path to Castle Black was familiar to Jaime now. He had seen the wall in its various states, battered and partially collapsed at Eastwatch, yet still imposing at the main gate. The wind howled around them as they approached. Black banners flapped in the frigid air, and the few remaining brothers of the Watch stood vigilant. Their ranks had diminished after the war, but their resolve remained. Jaime dismounted in the courtyard, greeted by a grizzled man named Adt. He recognized the man as the acting Lord Commander, a steward who had outlived nearly all others of higher rank. Ed's face was etched with worry as he explained the situation. A band of wildlings, exiles who refused the truce, had taken refuge in the mountains near the Frostfangs. They were well armed and had been launching raids on small settlements and watch patrols alike. We don't have enough men to handle them, Ed said, voice laced with frustration. They may not be numerous, but they know the terrain better than we do. Jaime nodded, absorbing the details. We'll help, he said simply. The North can't afford another conflict spiraling out of control. He conferred with Brienne and the other knights, planning a strategic approach. They would move at first light, venturing into the foothills where the raiders were last spotted. The night at Castle Black was bitter cold, and Jaime could hardly sleep, his mind churning with possibilities. The next morning they set out, accompanied by a handful of black brothers who knew the paths. The climb was arduous, the ground rocky and covered in patches of ice. Visibility was poor as clouds loomed overhead. After several hours they came upon a cluster of huts, half hidden by the landscape. Smoke rose from one of them. Jaime and Brienne, leading the way, dismounted and approached on foot, swords ready. The hush pressed down on them, broken only by the sound of the wind whistling through the crags. Suddenly, a shout pierced the air. Figures emerged from behind rocks, hurling spears and firing arrows. Jaime yelled for his men to take cover, ducking behind a boulder as an arrow clattered against the stone. Brienne positioned herself beside him, shield raised, her face set in fierce concentration. The exiled wildlings were indeed prepared for a fight. Chaos erupted. The knights returned fire with crossbows and the Black Brothers rushed forward. Steel met steel in a brutal close-quarters clash. Jaime parried a thrust from a wiry wildling armed with twin daggers. He countered with a swift slash, forcing his opponent back. Out of the corner of his eye he saw Brienne engaging two raiders at once, her sword a flashing arc of deadly precision. A wildling woman, tall and snarling, charged at Jaime with an axe. He barely managed to block the first swing, feeling the impact jar his arm. She was strong, desperation fueling her strikes. He sidestepped her next blow, using his golden hand to shove her off balance before delivering a strike that incapacitated her. Around him, the melee raged, men grappling in the snow, blood spraying across the white ground. Gradually, the tide turned in Jaime's favor. The exiles fought fiercely but were outnumbered and lacked discipline. Some tried to flee, but Brienne and a group of knights cut off their retreat. One by one, the raiders were subdued or killed, their cries echoing among the rocky slopes. When it was over, Jaime surveyed the scene with a grin set to his jaw. Several of his own men lay wounded or still. He felt the familiar sting of loss. War, in any form, was never without cost. They tended to the wounded and rounded up the surviving raiders. Ed arrived, face ashen as he took stock of the casualties. Brienne, her sword tip resting in the snow, panted from exertion, blood staining her mail. Jaime's heart clenched at the sight of her exhaustion, but she nodded that she was uninjured. The prisoners spat curses, calling them traitors to the free folk. Jaime only shook his head. There was no easy solution for those who refused to bend. Once the dead were buried in the frozen ground and the wounded tended to, Jaime and Brienne led the return to Castle Black. The captured exiles marched in chains, a silent testament to the ever-present strife beyond the wall. At Castle Black, they would stand before whatever form of justice remained in the Watch. It was a grim business but necessary. That night, Jaime found himself once again in the austere quarters of Castle Black, a single torch flickering against the dark walls. He sat on a low bench, elbows on his knees trying to process the day's events. The door creaked open, and Brienne entered, looking worn yet resolute. She sat beside him without a word. After a moment he spoke, voice low. I thought I'd left all this chaos behind when the war ended, but it seems there's always more to do. She sighed, resting a hand on his knee. We can't save everyone, Jaime. But we do what we can. He covered her hand with his, grateful for her steadiness. I know, he murmured. Then, with a faint, tired smile, he turned to her. And I'm glad you're here. She returned his gaze, and despite the exhaustion etched in her features, there was a warmth in her eyes. In that moment, the bleakness of the setting receded, and he felt the comfort of her presence wrapping around him. Whatever came next, be it more raids, more political strife, or the lingering ghosts of the North's past, they would face it together. The following morning, they concluded their business at the wall, leaving Eid with the reassurance that if more trouble arose, Winterfell would respond. As they rode back south, Jaime felt the weight of fatigue pressing down on him, but also a sense of accomplishment. The North was secure for now, or at least as secure as it could be in such turbulent times. When they finally glimpsed the towers of Winterfell, a strange warmth bloomed in Jaime's chest. It felt like coming home, an unfamiliar sensation for a man who once believed home was the gilded corridors of Casterly Rock. As they passed through the gates, guards hailed them. Jaime returned their greetings, leading the company into the courtyard where stable boys rushed to take their horses. Descending from his mount, Jaime rubbed his sore shoulders. Brienne dismounted beside him, and they exchanged a glance that spoke of shared relief. Before either could speak, a familiar figure approached, Sansa Stark, flanked by a few guards and advisors. She took in the sight of them, battered and weary, yet unbroken. "Welcome back," she said, her tone indicating she'd heard the news already from the ravens sent ahead. "The North owes you another debt of gratitude." Jaime bowed. "Only doing my duty, Your Grace." Sansa nodded, her gaze drifting from Jaime to Brienne. A small smile curved her lips. "The realm could use more knights of your caliber," she said to Brienne, who ducked her head modestly. Then Sansa turned back to Jaime. "Rest, you've earned it, but I fear we'll have more to discuss soon." He exhaled, exhaustion and acceptance mingling within him. "Of course, Your Grace." That evening, as the torches flickered in the great hall, Jaime found a measure of contentment in the routine bustle of Winterfell's daily life. He dined with Brienne, swapping brief, weary smiles. Lords and ladies approached to inquire about the mission, some offering praise, others voicing fresh concerns. Through it all, Jaime felt a sense of belonging he had never expected. The North's harsh lessons had shaped him in ways he couldn't have imagined back when he stood in King's Landing in shining armor, brimming with arrogance. Later he walked with Brienne along the ramparts under a sky strewn with stars. The night air was crisp, carrying a distant promise of spring. They paused at the very spot where they once shared a moment of quiet intimacy. He turned to her, searching her face. "Would you ever have believed," he said softly, "that we'd end up here, together, guarding the North?" She let out a soft chuckle. "If you had told me that when we first met, I'd have thought you mad." Then her expression grew thoughtful. "But we've both traveled a long, winding road, Jaime. Fate, if such a thing exists, held us here. No." He reached out, taking her hand in his. The moonlight revealed the faint lines of battle and hardship on both their faces, but it also illuminated the strength and resilience that came from facing those battles side by side. In that unspoken moment, they found a sense of peace rarely afforded to those who lived by the sword. "Whatever comes," Jaime said, voice hushed, "we'll face it, I promise." She nodded, lips curving into a determined smile. Together. And so Jaime Lannister stood as Warden of the North, Brienne of Tarth at his side. The snows would always return, and darkness would forever lurk in the corners of the realm, but the North had endured worse. For the first time in a long, tumultuous life, Jaime felt that he had a purpose guided by honor, by duty, and by the quiet flame of a bond forged in the coldest of nights. Winterfell's walls stood tall around them, guardians of ancient memories and harbingers of new beginnings. And in the heart of that fortress, beneath the ever-watchful sky, Jaime Lannister found something he never expected. A chance at redemption, and a home he could fight for until his last breath. Jaime Lannister woke early the next morning, feeling the familiar chill of the North creeping in through the narrow window of his chamber. He had grown used to that cold against his skin, enough so that sometimes, in the depth of quiet hours, it felt almost comforting. He rose, pulled on woolen breeches and a tunic lined with fur, and flexed the gold hand he still wore, even here, far from the Lannister halls. Sometimes he wondered if he should have it replaced with something simpler. Yet every time that thought struck him, he recalled the significance of what he had lost and what he had found. The hand was a symbol of his past, a piece of arrogance melted into something new. Leaving it behind would be like pretending none of it had ever happened, and he was no longer a man who tried to bury his mistakes. Brienne was waiting in the courtyard when he stepped out into the pale morning light, her armor gleaming under a cloak of grayish wool. The winter snows had receded, revealing stone walkways and patches of muddy earth, but the North's chill still bit at any exposed flesh. The sun hadn't quite cleared the ramparts, so long shadows stretched over the ground. She offered Jaime a small nod. Neither needed grand gestures. They had fought side by side enough times to communicate with mere glances, to see the unspoken bond that had only grown stronger over these months. Another day's chores, Jaime said quietly, keeping his voice low. He saw some of the guards glance their way, not with suspicion, but with the half-curious acceptance that had become the norm since rumors about them began to swirl through Winterfell's corridors. He didn't mind. Whispers were inevitable, especially when a Lannister and the Maid of Tarth seemed inseparable. Brienne tucked a stray lock of hair behind her ear. "We have a meeting with Lady Sansa after the midday meal," she said. "Something about new trade routes from White Harbor darts. They want us to weigh in on additional escorts." "Now?" He nodded. "Yes, I recall. The roads near the White Knife can be treacherous in the spring floods. We'll need to allocate men to keep bandits off the merchant paths." He glanced around as a stable boy approached, leading 2 horses. Winterfell bustled with early morning energy, kitchen staff hauling sacks of grain, soldiers exchanging greetings at the gate, and a few blacksmiths hammering away in the distance. Despite the routine, he sensed an underlying tension always present in the north, as though old ghosts hovered just out of sight. Brienne gave a slight smile. "I was going to spar before breaking my fast. Would you care to join me?" Jaime adjusted the glove over his gold hand. "Always." They walked to the training yard in companionable silence. A few younger knights and men-at-arms had begun their own exercises, the ring of steel on steel echoing against the high walls. Spotting Jaime and Brienne, they made room, some pausing to watch. Jaime knew they liked seeing Brienne's skill. Many had never sparred with a woman so adept she could best almost any man in the castle. He retrieved a practice sword, heavy oak wrapped with leather at the hilt. Adjusting his stance, he raised the blade in his left hand. Even now, flashes of memory, of when he had a right hand that was the envy of the realm, came unbidden. But it had been years since he lost that hand, and he'd fought too many battles since to doubt himself. Brienne settled into her own stance, sword at the ready. For a moment, the world seemed to narrow to just the 2 of them. She struck first, a brisk overhead blow that Jaime parried with a quick pivot, forcing her sword aside before stepping in to retaliate. Their wooden weapons smacked together, a sharp crack in the crisp air. The watchers edged closer, but respectfully stayed out of reach. Brienne pressed forward, her movements graceful and purposeful, her eyes bright with focus. Jaime answered each strike with a block or sidestep, letting the training head honed since his injury guide his reflexes. What he lacked in raw speed compared to his past, he made up for with cunning angles and quick thinking. They danced like that for several minutes, blows met with parries, feints answered by counters. Sweat beaded on Jaime's forehead despite the cold. He realized that, in some ways, this was his favorite part of the day, a time when neither of them had to speak or plan or worry about diplomacy. It was just the rhythm of wood against wood, the subtle grin on Brienne's face when she recognized a technique he'd borrowed from their old journeys, and the sense of peace that came from mutual respect. Finally, Brienne slipped an attack under his guard, a short lunge that would have ended the fight if her sword were steel. Jaime let out a breath, halting the spar. "Well struck," he said, half smiling as he lowered his own practice blade. She inclined her head, cheeks flushed from exertion. "You've improved your footwork. If I hadn't feinted that last thrust, you'd have had me." It was a quiet sort of praise that made him feel lighter than any applause. "Next time," he said, and she laughed softly. He handed off the practice sword to one of the onlookers, who accepted it with wide-eyed admiration. Brienne did the same, and they made their way toward the hall to clean up before breakfast. Along the way, Jaime caught glimpses of daily life in Winterfell. A steward directing servants to prepare fresh linens, a blacksmith rolling a cart of newly forged nails, a pair of young stable hands racing each other across the courtyard. Despite past devastations, the castle thrived. Inside, the warmth from the hearths enveloped them, and they parted ways briefly, each heading to their own chamber to remove the heavier layers and refresh themselves. Jaime found his room in the eastern wing comfortable now, though at first it had seemed terribly austere compared to the luxuries he'd known at Casterly Rock or even King's Landing. He no longer cared for ornate tapestries or gold-studded chairs. He wiped his face with a damp cloth, checking his reflection in the small mirror. The lines around his eyes were deeper now, but he recognized a steadiness there that he'd never possessed in his youth. When he joined Brienne again in the Great Hall, the tables were filled with lords, knights, and important retainers taking a morning meal. The hall smelled of spiced bread, smoked fish, and hot tea. At the high table, a space was cleared for them near Sansa's seat. The Queen in the north was already speaking with Lord Glover, both leaning over a parchment while they ate. She looked up as Jaime and Brienne approached, a faint smile forming on her lips. "Good morning," Sansa said, gesturing for them to sit. "I trust your sparring went well." Brienne nodded, her voice polite. "It did, Your Grace. I hope we haven't missed any urgent matters." Lord Glover snorted softly. "Urgent is a matter of perspective. We've got trouble near the coast. Ships out of the Iron Islands are said to be prowling around taking advantage of the calmer seas. Merchants in White Harbor are complaining about raised fees for escorts because they fear raids." Jaime exchanged a glance with Brienne. "The Ironborn always test the waters when they sense weakness. With winter ending, they might see new opportunities. Have there been direct attacks?" Sansa looked at Glover. The older lord shook his head, shoulders tense under a heavy cloak. "No direct attacks on major ships yet. Just rumors and a few sightings. But rumors can scare merchants into raising prices or seeking alternative routes. That hurts our trade." Jaime frowned. "We might need to send a delegation or a warning. The Ironborn are now officially under Yara Greyjoy's rule, aren't they?" "It could be renegades," Brienne added quietly, taking a sip of tea. "In the Iron Islands, not everyone respects their own queen's edicts. It might be small crews testing new routes for plunder." Sansa reached over and tapped the parchment in front of her. "I'd like to send a small fleet from White Harbor to patrol the coast and keep watch. Not to initiate battle, but to show presence. Yet we need to do it carefully, so as not to spark a bigger conflict." Jaime nodded. "I'll write to Yara Greyjoy directly, informing her that we've heard rumors of her men prowling the northern coast. I'll demand clarification and a promise that they're not behind these raids. That might pressure her to rein in any rogues." "Or Tal." Sansa's smile held a hint of approval. "Do that. In the meantime, I'll coordinate with Lord Manderley to have a few of his ships bolster defenses along the coast. We'll keep it subtle but firm." Brienne finished her tea and set the cup aside. "We should also consider increased escorts for merchant caravans traveling overland to White Harbor. If Ironborn raiders land on shore, they might try to strike quickly and retreat to their ships." Lord Glover grunted. "We can spare some men from Deepwood Moat to patrol the roads. It's better than letting fear fester." "None." Sansa nodded, satisfied. "Then it's decided. We'll coordinate after midday and finalize the details." With that matter settled, they moved on to lighter conversation. Jaime picked at the smoked fish on his plate, not truly hungry, but eating out of habit. He surveyed the hall's occupants, noticing that although some still glanced at him as an outsider, he was far from shunned. He thought back to the early days of his arrival, how the courtyard would grow hushed whenever he passed. Now men and women of Winterfell greeted him with nods or even friendly words. He had learned that trust here was not given, it was earned through consistent deeds. He and Brienne had done enough, stopping raiders, dealing with the Boltons, ensuring the roads were safe, that their presence was regarded as a boon rather than a threat. Once breakfast concluded, Jaime rose to gather quills and parchment, intending to write that letter to Yara. Brienne accompanied him, the two of them walking side by side through the corridors until they reached his solar. The room was modest, with a wooden desk, shelves for scrolls, and a few cushions before a fireplace. A small window let in a slant of pale light. Brienne settled in a corner, arms folded. "Think Yara will even bother reading your letter? She's bold enough to ignore it." Jaime dipped the quill into ink. "Perhaps, but we have to at least make the formality. We'll see if she responds. If she doesn't, then we escalate. Better to start with words than swords, as you once told me." He paused, glancing up at her. "You have a knack for reminding me of the better path." She gave a faint smile, a mixture of humility and warmth. "We've both learned that the consequences of war can linger far too long. If a letter can prevent a fleet from sailing, is worth the ink." He returned the smile, then focused on writing, his left-handed script neat but lacking the practiced elegance he once possessed. He composed a polite yet firm missive. "Greetings to the Queen of the Iron Islands. a mention of the alliance forged to overthrow Cersei and fight the undead, and a request for clarification on the rumors. He wrote that as Warden of the North, he needed assurance that no Ironborn ships were threatening their coasts. He concluded with a brief reminder that the North and the Iron Islands had once fought side by side for the greater good, suggesting that peace should endure. When he finished, Brienne stepped over and peered at the parchment. "That should do," she said. Pointed but not insulting. He chuckled. I doubt she'd even notice an insult if it came from a Lannister. With that, he signed and sealed it, pressing the wax with the sigil ring that Sansa had granted him, a temporary seal marking him Warden of the North. Even that had felt strange at first, as though he were trespassing. Now, it felt like part of his duty, no more and no less. He handed the letter to a waiting scribe to be sent by Raven. They left the Solar and headed toward the armory to check on the weapons store that had recently been replenished. Though the immediate threats to the north had diminished, Jaime refused to let the castle's defenses slip. Warriors of the north were proud, but pride alone couldn't keep swords sharp. With every passing day, the realm inched further from the memory of the Great War and the War of the Five Kings. Jaime, however, knew too well how quickly peace could crumble. The armory lay near the western gate, a squat structure built for function, not beauty. It smelled of steel and hot coals, and the rhythmic clang of hammer on metal reverberated. The master-at-arms, a stout, balding man named Burleigh, met them at the entrance with a respectful bow. "Sir Jaime, Sir Brienne," he said, wiping sweat from his brow. "We've just finished forging 24 new spears and a half-dozen swords. They're not Valyrian steel, mind you, but they'll hold." Brienne nodded. "That's good to hear. Show us." He led them inside, past racks of mail shirts, boxes of arrowheads, and shelves of spare parts for crossbows. In a corner, fresh spears leaned against the wall, their steel tips gleaming. Next to them lay swords in various stages of completion. Jaime tested the balance of one blade, swinging it carefully. The steel was solid, the edge decently sharpened. "These will serve well," Jaime said, returning the blade. "Keep at it, Master Burleigh. The realm's calmer than it was, but we should be prepared for anything." Burleigh gave a grunt of agreement. "Aye, my lord." When they stepped back out into the courtyard, the midday sun had burned through the morning gloom, spilling a gentle warmth over the stones. Jaime let out a breath, feeling a momentary relief that the long winter was finally receding. He remembered how the north looked under endless snow, the sky so gray it blended with the land. Now, with warmer days, green shoots dared to poke through the soil. It felt like renewal. Brienne caught his eye. "I'll see you in the council room soon. We need to finalize the plans with Sansa." He nodded. "I'll be there. I just want to check on something in the stables first." She hesitated, her gaze lingering on him. He felt a pleasant warmth at the unspoken concern in her eyes. Neither of them had announced any formal bond, but the entire castle seemed aware of the quiet closeness that had grown between them. Often, he wondered if they'd ever speak openly of it, or if the unspoken truth was enough. After she departed, Jaime made his way to the stables, intending to inspect a new mare rumored to be swift and strong. On his route, he passed a few new recruits practicing archery. They stiffened in their stances as he went by, trying to impress him. He offered a small nod, remembering how once he'd done the same whenever Lord Commander Barristan Selmy walked by. In the stable, the scents of hay and horse filled the air. A stable hand was brushing down a dark brown mare, her coat glossy under the bristles. Jaime stepped closer. The horse flicked her ears but didn't startle. He ran his hand along her flank, feeling the solid muscle. "She's a beaut, isn't she?" asked the stable hand, a short woman with a freckled face. "Just came in from the Rills. Lord Serwyn sent her as a gift for Lady Sansa." Jaime nodded. "A fine gift indeed." He patted the mare's side. "Keep good care of her." He was about to leave when the roar of distant horns cut through the courtyard, their echoes bouncing off Winterfell's walls. His heart seized for a moment, knowing that horns in the north usually signaled arrivals or warnings. Without a second's delay, he rushed outside. Guards on the ramparts were sounding the horns again, and Jaime spotted a small company approaching the main gates. They flew the flag of the Vale, the Falcon and Moon of House Arryn. The gates swung open, and the newcomers rode into the courtyard, their horses kicking up mud. At their head was a tall man in his 30s, wearing a fur-lined cloak. Jaime recognized him from descriptions. Lord Robin Arryn, sometimes called Sweet Robin, though that moniker felt odd for a man now grown. He was accompanied by a retinue of knights bearing the sigil of the Vale. Jaime hurried down the steps just as Brienne and Sansa arrived from another direction. The tension in the courtyard was palpable as the knights dismounted. Robin Arryn surveyed the scene, his features sharp, nose slightly upturned, as though the North's chill offended him. Yet when he looked upon Sansa, he managed a cordial bow. "My lady cousin," Robin said, voice trembling faintly from either the cold or nerves. "I've come to Winterfell on urgent business. The Vale might require the North's assistance." Sansa's expression was cool and dignified. "Lord Robin, you're welcome here. Please come inside. We'll talk in the Great Hall." Robin's gaze flicked past her to rest on Jaime Lannister. Something unreadable crossed his face before he merely nodded. Jaime gave a polite inclination of his head, prepared to make peace if necessary. The crowd that had gathered murmured softly, wondering what new trouble might have arrived. Sansa led Robin and his knights into the Great Hall, where servants quickly brought warmed wine and set fresh logs on the fire. Jaime took a seat beside Brienne while the Vale Knights remained standing, as though unsure of their welcome. Robin Arryn removed his gloves, flexing his fingers nervously. He cast a long look at the high table, and perhaps at the memories of the last time he'd visited Winterfell, which had been ages ago. Sansa gestured for him to speak, her voice even. "Tell us what troubles the Vale, cousin." Robin cleared his throat, glancing around to ensure no one unauthorized was listening too closely. Jaime noted the man's anxious manner and the slight ruddiness in his cheeks. "There have been attacks on our northern passes," he began. "Small, stealthy raids. At first we thought it was just mountain clans, but the scale and coordination suggest a more organized force. They strike at night, burn a village or a granary, and vanish. Our knights have tried to chase them, but they melt into the mountains." Nah. The Vale was famously difficult to invade, with its narrow passes and high peaks. For a force to move in and out so effectively was troubling. Jaime exchanged a look with Brienne. Sansa leaned forward, concern etched in her brow. "Do you have any idea who's behind these attacks?" Robin's jaw worked. "We caught one raider alive, but he died of his wounds before giving us much. He had no sigils, no clear markings. He spoke with a strange accent, somewhere from the west, maybe the hills near the Westerlands, or perhaps even the Riverlands. We're not sure." "Nay." Jaime's thoughts immediately went to outlaws that might have formed since the wars, men who drifted between regions, fighting for coin or out of vengeance. But the question was why they'd strike the Vale. Sansa asked precisely that. Robin pressed his lips together. "I suspect they mean to destabilize us, possibly to test if we're paying attention. They always target our food stores or villages that supply our garrisons. It's sabotage, more than just looting." "Nate," Brienne spoke softly. "Have you asked for any assistance from the Riverlands or the Crownlands? Are they experiencing similar raids?" Robin nodded, exasperated. "Lord Tully has had reports of bandits near the Freylands, but not nearly so organized. King's Landing is busy rebuilding. They dismissed my ravens, telling me to handle my mountain clans on my own." His tone held a bitterness that hinted at how he'd been brushed aside. "So I've come here because the Vale and the North stood together many times, and I trust Sansa more than I trust half the other lords in Westeros." Sansa leaned back, her expression pensive. The firelight cast shifting shadows across her face. "We'll help if we can," she said. "But the North is vast, and we have issues of our own. Threats along the coast, wildling raiders, the Boltons still stirring in some corners. Yet your safety is important. The Vale kept us alive once, when we faced Ramsay." Robin's gaze flickered, an acknowledgement of old debts. "We'll repay any assistance," he said. "Troops, grain, gold." Jaime studied the man's bearing. Robin Arryn had once been a sickly child, overshadowed by greater players in the Game of Thrones. Now he wore the mantle of leadership, albeit with unease. Still, desperation shone in his eyes. He wouldn't have come north unless the matter was urgent. "I propose we send scouts to the Vale to assess these raids firsthand," Jaime offered. "Men who know how to track in harsh terrain. If these raiders are organized, We need intelligence on their numbers, their supply lines. Sansa nodded, thinking. We do have a few rangers with experience in the mountains near the Frostfangs. They might be useful to you. She turned to Robin. That's the best first step, understanding the threat. Then we'll decide if we can spare troops. Robin let out a breath, relief mingling with residual anxiety. Thank you, cousin. Even a handful of good men might help us turn the tide. Sansa rose, indicating the meeting's end. We'll speak more on this tonight. For now, let your men rest, resupply. Winterfell is yours for as long as you need. With that, the Vale Knights bowed. Robin offered Sansa a smile filled with gratitude, and then they departed to settle their horses and find chambers. Only Jaime, Brienne, and Sansa remained near the hearth. The Queen in the north stared into the flames for a long moment, her fingers toying with the fur trim of her cloak. At least it's not war with the Vale, Jaime said, attempting a light tone. Sansa's lips curved in a faint smile. No, but it could be another ripple of chaos. The realm is full of them, it seems. She turned to Brienne. Will you handle picking the rangers to send south? Brienne nodded. I know a few who are adept at moving unseen in rough terrain. I'll gather them. Sansa thanked her softly, then looked at Jaime. You should speak to Robin as well. He knows you from stories, both good and ill. He might need a firmer hand to guide him if the danger grows. Jaime accepted the unspoken hint. Sansa wanted him to keep a close eye on the Vale situation, possibly offering leadership if the raids escalated. I'll do so, he promised. If the North commits men, we'll make sure they're well led. Not long after, Jaime found Lord Robin in one of the smaller solar rooms, sipping mulled wine and staring at a map of the Vale. The young lord glanced up when Jaime entered, standing a bit stiffly. Sir Jaime, he said, cautious. I didn't expect the Kingslayer to be Warden of the North. Jaime suppressed a weary sigh. He hadn't been called Kingslayer to his face in some time, at least not by those around Winterfell. He chose not to bristle. The realm changes, he said simply, stepping forward. He glanced at the map. The Eyrie, the Bloody Gate, the Mountain of the Moon. I came to see if you needed anything. Your men must be tired from the journey. Robin nodded, swirling his wine. Hey, they are. We'll rest, then speak more with the Queen. I appreciate your courtesy. He hesitated. Truth be told, I never thought to have a Lannister as an ally, but Sansa speaks highly of your role here. Jaime inclined his head. I won't pretend the past is forgotten. But for the good of the realm, I'm determined to help keep it stable. If these raids threaten the Vale, they threaten all of us. And Sansa is family to you. I want her realm safe too. Nyan. Robin's gaze swept over Jaime's face, perhaps noting the lines that hinted at age and the quiet intensity in his eyes. My mother always said Lannisters were dangerous, cunning as serpents. But you fought for the living against the dead. That counts for something, I suppose. Jaime allowed a faint, ironic smile. I was far from perfect. But yes, I did my part. We all did what we had to do. He stepped closer to the map, running a finger along the roads leading through the mountains of the moon. I've passed through the Vale once, but never deep into the mountains. If these raiders know the terrain, they can slip away easily. Do you have local guides who can help the rangers from the north? Robin nodded. We do. Though the mountain clans are a wild card, some are friendly if we pay them enough. Others might be working with these raiders. It's a mess. Jaime thought for a moment, then said, We'll unravel it. For now, get some rest. Once you've had time, I'd like to hear every detail about the attacks. Frequency, targets, any patterns you've noticed. He paused, then added, If it comes to sending northern troops, I'll go with them to make sure everything is coordinated properly. But let's hope it doesn't come to that. Robin gave a tight-lipped nod, as though uncertain how to deal with Jaime's directness. But there was also a flicker of relief. Thank you, Sir Jaime. Leaving Robin to his wine, Jaime returned to the corridors, finding them alive with the hustle and bustle of midday. Servants bustled by with trays for the visiting knights, while guards saluted as he passed. He contemplated the swirl of events, possible Ironborn trouble on the coasts, unrest in the Vale, the leftover tensions with the Boltons, and the ever-present threat of smaller bandit bands across the north. It seemed no matter how many fires they put out, sparks flew up elsewhere. He wasn't entirely surprised by that. He'd grown old enough in war to know that peace was a fragile thing. Yet, For all these challenges, he felt more at peace himself than he ever had in the South. There was purpose in these problems, a sense that they were all forging a better future out of the ashes of calamity. That sentiment carried him through the day, from council meetings to quick discussions with lords, all the way to a small supper that night in the Great Hall. Robin Arryn joined them at the high table, looking less anxious but still ill at ease in Winterfell's stony confines. Over cups of spiced wine and plates of roast mutton, the talk circled back to the Vale's troubles. Brienne, seated beside Jaime, took careful note of each detail, occasionally asking questions that showed her mind was already strategizing. Sansa provided updates on the rangers she'd selected, men led by a seasoned scout named Huther, who had once ranged beyond the wall. Jaime was pleased. Huther was no stranger to mountains or to subterfuge. When the conversation lulled, Sansa invited Robin to walk with her in the Godswood, leaving Jaime and Brienne alone at the table for a brief span. Across the hall, men lingered over ale, telling tales of old battles. The torches crackled, illuminating dust motes drifting in the air. Brienne leaned closer to Jaime, voice low. Lord Arryn seems genuine in his fear, if nothing else. Jaime sipped from his cup, the wine warming his throat. Yes, and he's not a man who would travel all this way for no reason. I suspect those raids have rattled him deeply. The Vale has always been proud of its security. She tapped her fingers on the table. We should be ready for anything. If it's more than brigands, if there's a force behind it, this could escalate. Agreed, he said. His eyes flicked to her gauntleted hand, resting on the table's edge. An urge rose within him to place his own hand over hers, a small gesture that would be more openly affectionate than anything done in public. But they were in the Great Hall, where the eyes of lords and ladies still pried. Instead, he reached for the jug of wine and poured a bit more into her cup, a subtle courtesy that made her smile. They parted ways after supper. Brienne went to finalize the scouting arrangements, while Jaime lingered in the courtyard, letting the cold night air clear his head. He thought he might find Sansa there with Robin, but saw no sign of them. Instead, he wandered toward the Godswood himself, drawn by the quiet hush of the place. The branches of the weirwood whispered in the gentle breeze. The carved face, ever watching, gazed upon the reflection in the pool. He stood for a long moment, simply listening to his own breathing in the silence. Memories swirled, kneeling before a Targaryen king as a young knight, dreaming of glory, throwing Bran Stark from a tower, sealing his name as Oathbreaker in more ways than one, meeting Brienne, hating her at first, then respecting her, and now holding her in a place deeper than respect. Life had a way of twisting paths. He had never expected to be here, caretaker of the North, standing vigil in a Godswood dedicated to old gods he barely knew. Yet here he was, feeling a sense of belonging. Footsteps rustled behind him. He turned to see Brienne approaching through the moonlight. She wore a heavy cloak, her breath a visible mist in the cold. She paused when she saw him, a gentle smile tugging at her lips. "You're up late," she said softly. He gestured to the silent grove. "It's peaceful here. I needed a moment away from all the horns, the feasts, the letters." She nodded, stepping closer until they stood side by side, looking at the ancient heart tree. "I sent the ravens to gather the rangers. They'll leave by the end of the week with Lord Arryn's men." He glanced at her. "And are you going with them?" He had assumed she would remain at Winterfell, but Brienne was never one to stand idle if her sword could help. She shook her head. "Not this time. Sansa needs me here, and we agreed that your presence might become necessary. If things worsen in the Vale, you'll likely go. And if both of us leave, Winterfell would be left without our combined counsel." He felt a twist of relief mixed with guilt. A part of him hated the idea of her riding into danger without him, and yet he also knew she was more than capable. But the fact that she'd stay, that they'd remain side by side for now, settled something inside him. "It's the right choice," he said gently. They fell into a hush then, the hush of the Godswood that seemed to encourage introspection. Finally he ventured, "Brienne, I'm grateful. For your partnership, for what we share." She turned, her gaze meeting his. The reflection of moonlight in her eyes was soft, kind. "I know," she said quietly, and there was a slight tremor in her voice. "Me too. I never expected this. You here. Us. He lifted his good hand, hesitated, and then let it rest lightly against her cheek. The cold night air brushed against them, but he felt the warmth of her skin through that brief contact. She didn't flinch. Instead, she closed her eyes for an instant, leaning into his touch. "We'll keep doing our duty," he murmured. "The North needs stability, and so does the Vale. But wherever all this leads, I want you to know I stand with you." Her breath caught, and when she opened her eyes, he saw something unspoken that mirrored the stirring in his own chest. Before either could voice it, distant voices in the courtyard reminded them that they were not truly alone, that Winterfell never slept completely. Reluctantly, Jaime withdrew his hand. They exchanged a small private smile, then walked back through the weirwood arch, side by side, but maintaining a respectful space between them for the benefit of any watchful eyes. Over the next days, news came swiftly. The Ironborn letter arrived first, a curt missive from Yara Greyjoy herself, denying any official raids and promising to investigate rumors of rogue captains. Jaime read it over at least twice, searching for hidden meanings, but it appeared genuine. He knew that didn't mean much. A single rebellious longship could cause havoc if so inclined. Yet it was enough to reassure Lord Manderley, who set his small fleet to patrol without expecting immediate war. Then the Rangers set off for the Vale. Lord Robin departed with them after yet another round of thanks to Sansa. He left behind a sense of uneasy anticipation. Would these scouts confirm a serious threat? Or would they find it was just a handful of desperate bandits? Winterfell's courtyard felt emptier after they were gone, the echoes of their departure lingering in the halls. In their absence, Jaime continued his duties as warden. Each morning, he met with local lords or castle officers. He heard petty disputes, two farmers arguing over grazing rights, a blacksmith demanding repayment from a knight who hadn't settled his debt. Such mundane details felt oddly fulfilling. Handling them meant ensuring peace in a kingdom that had seen too much chaos. He also noticed how Brienne settled seamlessly into tasks that once might have gone to a master of arms. She oversaw training drills, corrected posture and footwork, and ensured the garrison stayed disciplined. Men looked up to her with a respect that went beyond her title. They knew she had bled for the North. And at times, Jaime would catch her gaze from across the yard, and for a heartbeat, everything else would fade. One day, a raven brought a message from the Dreadfort. Lord Aeron Bolton, looking to prove his loyalty, reported that he had uncovered a small group of outlaws sheltering in old crypts near the last river. He requested assistance from Winterfell to flush them out. Jaime debated whether to trust Bolton's request or suspect it was a trap, but in the end decided that ignoring it could invite more trouble. He formed a small party of reliable soldiers and set out, planning to meet Bolton's men halfway. Brienne prepared to come along, but Sansa insisted she remain behind for a scheduled negotiation with a group of mountain clans who had migrated south. It was odd to ride out without Brienne at his side, and Jaime felt a certain emptiness as he left Winterfell's gates. Still, duty was duty. The journey took 3 days of riding. Early spring had turned much of the snow to sludge, making the roads difficult. They passed scattered hamlets still battered from past wars. Some houses stood empty, their owners gone south or perished in the long night. Whenever Jaime encountered villagers, they stared at the Lannister banner with apprehension, but recognized the gray direwolf of Winterfell alongside it. No one openly challenged him. At last he arrived at a crossroads where Bolton's men waited, a stoic group in dark cloaks, bearing the flayed man's sigil. Jaime felt a familiar revulsion at the sight of that banner, but he kept his composure. Their captain, a wiry man with deep-set eyes, saluted curtly. "My lord," he said. "We ride east from here, into the marshy lands near the river. The outlaws were last spotted 2 days ago. Lord Bolton is certain they're holed up in the crypts of some old keep." Jaime noticed how the man's voice wavered at Lord Bolton. The name carried a dark weight. Regardless, he nodded. "Lead on." They pressed forward. The scenery grew bleak, flat expanses of half-frozen marsh stretching on either side. Gray clouds loomed overhead, threatening more sleet than snow. By dusk, they reached a derelict keep, a crumbling ruin of weathered stone, surrounded by stagnant water. The sky had darkened enough that torches became necessary. The Bolton captain directed the men to circle around and block any escape routes. Jaime led a small contingent forward, picking their way through what remained of a courtyard. Stones had tumbled from half-fallen walls, and a thick layer of muck clung to every step. Overhead, crows perched, silent watchers of the gloom. Jaime felt the prickle of old memories, abandoned castles, hidden dangers. He kept his sword hand near the hilt, though it was the golden prosthetic that gleamed the torchlight. The crypt entrance was easy to spot, a yawning arch leading below ground. Foul smell wafted up. Jaime waved 2 soldiers to the flanks and motioned to a third to follow him in. Carefully they descended. The passage was narrow, lined with broken cobwebs. By the wavering torchlight, Jaime saw niches in the walls, some holding ancient bones. The deeper they went, the colder it felt, as though the dead themselves exhaled ice. Suddenly, a scraping sound echoed ahead. Jaime froze, gesturing for the others to remain silent. Another scraping, followed by a faint cough. They were not alone. He crept forward, heart pounding, until he reached a chamber where the corridor widened. There, crouched around a dim lantern, were 5 figures clad in mismatched armor. Food scraps littered the floor. One man coughed hard, sounding ill. Another man sharpened a short sword on a whetstone. A woman with a bandaged leg stirred, looking around warily. Jaime caught a glimpse of steel glinting in the low light. Then he saw something else, a small chest behind them, likely containing stolen goods. The figures realized they had company almost too late. One swore, scrambling for a spear. Jaime stepped forward, voice harsh in the echoing chamber. "Hold, or die. The North does not tolerate outlaws." Panic spread across their features. The closest man lunged, but Jaime's soldier cut him down with a swift slash to the arm. The second soldier pinned another outlaw against the wall, and the woman with the bandaged leg tried to hobble away, only to be shoved back by Jaime's gold hand. She winced, dropping a knife. "Surround them," Jaime barked. The outlaws found themselves cornered in seconds, their eyes darting for any chance of escape. They looked half-starved, and the smell of sickness clung to them. Realizing they had no hope, 2 surrendered, throwing down their weapons and raising their hands. The others lay wounded on the ground. Jaime's men quickly bound them. He stooped to examine the chest they'd been guarding, prying it open with a dagger. Inside were silver cups, tarnished candlesticks, and a few odd trinkets, probably stolen from nearby villages. No gold, no grand prize. It was petty theft, but theft nonetheless. One of the outlaws glared at Jaime with sunken eyes. "What does a Lannister care about a few scraps of silver in the North?" he spat, bitterness twisting his face. Jaime stood, pushing the chest aside. "I am Warden of the North. I enforce Queen Sansa's peace. This has nothing to do with house sigils or gold. You preyed on good folk." He eyed the man's ragged clothes and gaunt cheeks. "Were you soldiers once? Deserted from some army?" A flicker of resentment flashed in the man's eyes. Fought in the war against the dead. Then nobody cared after. Crops burned, my family starved. So I took what I could." It was an old story, repeated across the ravaged realm. Jaime inhaled. Once he might have dismissed such a man outright, seeing only a criminal. Now he felt a pang of sympathy. War had left many survivors with no place to go. But that didn't excuse their crimes. He turned to his soldiers. "Secure them. We'll take them back to Lord Bolton for trial." The crypts yielded no other surprises. They spent the night camped in the ruins' courtyard, sharing stale rations as rain pelted the leftover walls. The outlaws were kept under guard, trembling in the cold. Jaime wondered if any mercy could be found for them under Bolton's rule. Still, it was the best he could do. Perhaps Bolton would show restraint to prove himself loyal to Sansa die. By dawn, they headed back. The trip was a muddy slog, but fortunately uneventful. When they finally reached the Dreadfort, Jaime felt the old disquiet the sight of that fortress always brought. Dark towers, a cruel history. Yet Lord Aaron Bolton greeted them courteously enough, flanked by his men. Jaime delivered the prisoners, explaining the situation. Bolton wrinkled his brow as he listened, perhaps already thinking about how best to handle the sentencing. "They'll face justice," Bolton assured Jaime, though the words sounded hollow. "Thank you for your assistance." Jaime gave a curt nod. "You should see to their wounds before deciding their fate. They're desperate men, not hardened criminals." "Nanled, Elway." Bolton nodded, face unreadable. I'll take that into account. After a brief rest, Jaime pressed on for Winterfell. The final leg of the journey was quiet. Night had fallen by the time he saw the familiar walls rising in the distance, lit by scattered torches. Relief flooded him. Winterfell had become home in a way he never thought possible, a place where he could exhale. He rode through the gates, stiff in the saddle. In the courtyard, a few guards offered respectful greetings, and stable hands rushed to take the horses. Jaime dismounted, the ache in his muscles reminding him he wasn't as young as he used to be. Before he could climb the steps, Brienne emerged from the keep, her eyes lighting up at the sight of him, though she kept her composure. "You're back," she said, her tone balanced between formality and warmth. "Any trouble?" He shook his head. "A small band of outlaws. We caught them. Lord Bolton has them now." He paused, searching her face. "Anything here?" She glanced around, voice dropping. "A messenger arrived this morning from the Vale. The news isn't good." Jaime's stomach tightened. "Let's talk inside." She led him to a quieter corridor off the main hall, where a single torch flickered, casting dancing shadows. The scouts found proof that the raids in the Vale are orchestrated by a larger group. Maybe 50 or 60 men, well equipped, possibly more. They wear no sigils and strike quickly. Lord Arryn lost another village, burned to the ground. Jaime swore under his breath. "Any idea who commands them?" Brienne shook her head. "No, say. They haven't been identified. Huther, our ranger, suspects they might have supplies coming from outside the Vale, but he doesn't know who would finance such attacks." "Nah, Ardus." Jaime sighed, leaning against the wall. "This is worse than random bandits. Organized, financed. Someone wants the Vale destabilized." Brienne's eyes gleamed with concern. "Sansa's been in council with her advisors all day, deciding whether to send troops. She waited for you to return before finalizing anything." He nodded, feeling weariness seep into his bones. "Let's see Sansa then. Though I suspect I know what she'll say." Negai. Together, they made their way to the solar where the Queen in the north often held smaller meetings. Sansa stood by a table cluttered with maps, a cloak draped over her shoulders. Lord Glover and Lady Mormont were also present, along with a few other northern lords of lesser rank. They all looked up when Jaime and Brienne entered. Sansa's face was taut with worry. "Welcome back," she said, not wasting time on pleasantries. "You've heard." Jaime inclined his head. "Yes," Brienne told me. "Raids in the Vale, possibly a large force." "No." Lord Glover grunted. "We can't leave them to fend for themselves. The Vale stood with us when we needed them." Lady Mormont crossed her arms. "But we have our own problems. If we send a host south and the Ironborn start raiding, or the Boltons stir up trouble again." She trailed off, her face grim. Sansa pinched the bridge of her nose. "We cannot commit half our army, but we should offer some. A token force, at least, to show we stand with the Vale." Her gaze shifted to Jaime. "And I'd like you to command it, if it comes to that." A hush fell. The lords exchanged glances, not entirely surprised, but weighing the implications. Jaime felt a swirl of emotions, pride at her trust, apprehension at the responsibility. "I'll do it," he said firmly. "But I'll need to coordinate with Lord Arryn. We can't just show up unannounced." Sansa exhaled slowly, relief and worry etched into her features. "I'll send ravens immediately. Our men are loyal, but they'll follow a leader they trust. By going, you're also showing that the North is serious about keeping its word." Brienne spoke up. "I suggest we pick men experienced in mountainous terrain. Maybe some of the same who fought in the Frostfangs or battled the wildlings. The Vale's passes can be treacherous." "Nah." Jaime nodded. "Agreed. 10 knights, maybe 100-foot soldiers, plus scouts. That should suffice for a start." Sansa looked around the room. "Any objections?" Lord Glover shook his head. "It's prudent. We'll keep the rest for the North's defense." Lady Mormont remained silent, which was as good as agreement from her. Others murmured approval. Then Sansa cleared her throat. "We'll finalize details tomorrow. For now, all of you, rest. I'll have letters drafted tonight to inform Lord Arryn that help is on the way." The meeting broke up. The lords exited, discussing logistics among themselves. Jaime lingered, the weight of command settling on his shoulders. Sansa approached him, her voice soft. "I'm sorry, Jaime. I know you just returned from one mission, and already I'm sending you off to another, but we can't ignore this." He shook his head. "No need to apologize, Your Grace. This is my responsibility. I said I'd serve the North, and these alliances matter." She placed a hand on his arm, a rare gesture of direct gratitude. "You've done more for us than many once thought possible. Keep proving them wrong." He managed a faint smile. "I will." Brienne caught his eye as she stepped forward. He sensed a question in her gaze, and once Sansa dismissed them, they walked out together. The corridors felt colder now, or perhaps it was the knowledge that he'd soon be leaving again. "Are you sure about this?" she asked quietly once they were alone. "Marching south into the Vale with a small force?" "It's our best option," Jaime said. "Lord Arryn needs help. If these raids aren't quelled, they might spill over into the Riverlands or even threaten the Neck eventually. Cutting it off now is better." She nodded, but there was a hint of concern that lingered. "I wish I could go with you." He touched her gauntlet briefly, making sure no passing servant would see. "You'll be needed here. Someone has to keep the North in line if the Boltons or Ironborn act up. And Sansa trusts you as her shield. We can't leave Winterfell unguarded." She pursed her lips. "I know. Still, I'd feel better fighting by your side." A warmth stirred in his chest at her admission, a reminder of how far they had come. Once, she would have preferred the company of a rabid dog to him. "The day might come," he said softly, "when we can face these threats together again." She nodded, and for a moment, it looked like she might speak words more personal, more candid. But the approach of a pair of knights cut the moment short. They separated, Brienne straightening her posture. The knights saluted, asking Jaime about the timeline for the Vale expedition. He gave them a quick rundown, mind slipping back into the role of commander. That night, Jaime found sleep elusive. He lay in bed, the chamber's fireplace casting flickering patterns on the walls. Images of the Vale's rocky passes clouded his thoughts, along with memories of the outlaws in the crypt, the tensions with the Boltons, and the distant threat of the Ironborn. It felt like a game of savas, pieces scattered across the board, each move precarious. The old him might have reveled in the intrigue, but now he only wanted stability for these people who had suffered too much. When he finally drifted off, he dreamed of a distant day when the snows were fully gone, and children laughed in castle courtyards without fear of war. In that dream, Brienne stood with him, both of them free from the burdens that had weighed them down so long. But dreams were fleeting, and dawn arrived with new orders to issue, new tasks to fulfill. The next few days flew by in a flurry of preparations. Men were chosen based on their skill in rough terrain. Weapons and provisions were gathered. Ravens traveled back and forth to the Vale, coordinating details with Lord Arryn's advisors. By the time the small northern host was ready to depart, Winterfell's courtyard bustled with the clang of armor and the stamping of horses. Jaime oversaw the loading of wagons, checking each detail meticulously. He wore a simpler set of armor these days, its finish dull rather than shining gold, out of respect for the North's customs. At his side hung the Valyrian steel sword, its hilt well worn by now. He watched as the final soldiers lined up, thick furs over their shoulders, swords and spears at the ready. Huther, the scout who had gone to the Vale before, had returned to guide them. He looked tired but resolute. Brienne stood by the gate, flanked by a handful of guards. Her face was composed, but her eyes betrayed concern. Jaime walked over, boots crunching on the half-frozen ground. They had spoken the night before, but still, there was a weight to this farewell. "Take care, Jaime," she said quietly, glancing around to ensure no prying ears were too close. "The mountains can be as dangerous as any battlefield." He nodded, swallowing a sudden dryness in his throat. "I'll be cautious." He wanted to say so much more, to promise he'd return, that he'd keep these men safe. But all he managed was a soft, "And you keep Winterfell secure." She gave a fractional smile. "Always." He turned to mount his horse, feeling her gaze on his back. With a final nod to the gathered men, he signaled for them to ride out. The gates parted, and the small column moved forward, hooves echoing on the cobblestones. Snow flurries drifted in the air, swirling around them as they exited into the wide northern plains. Jaime glanced over his shoulder for one last look at Winterfell. High on the ramparts, a figure that might have been Brienne watched them go. Then the walls receded into the distance, and he faced forward, guiding his men south, toward the Vale's uncertain horizon. The journey took them through the King's Road, which was in better shape now that winter had ebbed. Wagons moved slowly, slowed by patches of slush and mud, but their progress was steady. At night, they camped in small clusters around fires. Jaime would walk among the men, offering words of encouragement, listening to their concerns. Many were proud to go to the Vale's aid, recalling how the Knights of the Eyrie had swept in to help defeat Ramsay. Some were apprehensive, never having fought in mountainous terrain. Jaime promised them good guidance once they joined Lord Aaron's forces. The days bled together. Trees began to sprout new leaves and the air lost some of its biting chill. Occasionally they'd pass a village where the scars of war still lingered, half-rebuilt homes, fields that needed replanting. Jaime would speak with the villagers, gleaning what news he could of bandits or strife. Mostly he found that people wanted peace, a chance to rebuild their lives without fear. Eventually, they reached the edges of the Vale, where rocky foothills began to rise. The route wound between steep slopes overshadowed by pine forests. Here they met a party of Vale Knights who guided them farther in. Jaime recognized some of them from Robin's retinue. They greeted him respectfully, if a bit warily. But the presence of northern soldiers at least signaled a show of solidarity. After another day of climbing winding roads, the gates of the Bloody Gate came into view. Two massive stone towers flanked the pass, connected by a wall that spanned the narrow corridor. Archers manned the battlements. Jaime had passed through here once before, under entirely different circumstances. The memory pricked at him, but he shook it off. Lord Robin awaited them at a small camp just beyond the Bloody Gate. Tents had been erected on a plateau near a swift river, and as Jaime's company rode in, Vale soldiers rushed to help them stow gear. Robin himself emerged from a large pavilion, wearing a cloak embroidered with the Falcon and Moon's sigil. He greeted Jaime with a handshake that was more confident than before. "Sir Jaime," Robin said, scanning the northern men. "I'm relieved to see you. These raids, they've gotten worse. 2 more villages attacked since my last raven. Always the same pattern, food stores torched, a few survivors left behind to spread fear." Jaime dismounted, wincing slightly at the ache in his legs. "Then we'll act quickly. Show me your latest maps." Robin led him inside the pavilion where a table was laid out with parchments. The Vale Lords gathered there stood to acknowledge Jaime's arrival. He nodded curtly, eyeing the maps. Red marks indicated the sites of recent raids, all scattered around the base of the mountains leading up to the Eyrie. Huther, the northern scout, joined them, pointing at the routes the raiders might have taken. "They're skilled at covering their tracks. We found a couple trails, but they ended abruptly at rocky ridges." Robin folded his arms, frustration evident. "It's like they vanish into thin air. We've tried sending out roving patrols, but we're spread too thin. We can't guard every village at once." Jaime traced a path with his finger, noticing a pattern to the raids. "They're circling around, avoiding major roads. Could they have a hidden base somewhere in these mountains?" He tapped a blank area of the map, where the cartography was uncertain. "No keeps or castles here, but maybe caves or old ruins." A Vale Knight, older with a gray-streaked beard, shrugged. "That region is largely uncharted. Mountain clans used to roam there, but we haven't heard from them in a while. Could be the raiders are hiding in clan strongholds." Robin rubbed his temples. "We need to draw them out somehow or corner them, but I can't risk sending all my knights on a wild chase through the mountains. The Eyrie must remain defended, and I have to protect the farmland below." Jaime glanced at Huther, then at the older knight. "What if we set a trap? 1 or 2 villages that appear lightly defended, but in reality are manned by hidden soldiers. When the raiders show up, we surround them." "Nine." Robin's eyes narrowed. "We've considered that, but these bastards are clever. They scout villages first, strike fast and retreat. They might sense an ambush." Jaime nodded, lips pursed. "Yes, but if we choose a village they're likely to hit based on previous patterns, then hide our forces well enough, maybe station archers in nearby woods, there's a chance it could work. At the very least, we might capture some alive, force them to reveal who's commanding them." A hush settled as the Vale Lords weighed the risk. Finally, Robin exhaled. "It might be our best shot to end this quickly. Which village? They scoured the map for likely targets. A place near the foothills, modestly prosperous, but not so large that it warranted heavy guard. A village called Stonewood appeared as a candidate. It had a small storehouse for grain and was accessible from multiple mountain paths. They reasoned the raiders might see it as an easy target. Plans solidified. Over the next day, they organized two main forces, one to remain visible in the nearby fort, to give the impression that Stonewood was lightly defended, and another, smaller but elite group to hide in the wooded slopes around the village. Jaime would lead that ambush force, joined by some of Robin's best knights and Huther's rangers. They'd lie in wait, hoping the raiders took the bait. If the enemy didn't come, they'd try a different spot. It was a gamble, but few better options existed. The following evening, Jaime led the small contingent to Stonewood under cover of dusk. The village was modest, a handful of wooden houses around a central square, a storehouse on the edge. Most of the villagers had been warned to hide in cellars or flee to a safer location. A few brave souls remained to maintain the ruse of normal life, though they'd been told to vanish at the first sign of trouble. Jaime stationed archers on a ridge overlooking the storehouse, while the rest of the soldiers concealed themselves in barns or behind thick shrubs. The villagers extinguished most lights, leaving only faint flickers in the windows to mimic an evening routine. Then all fell quiet. Night deepened, stars peeking through scattered clouds. A cold wind rustled the trees. Jaime crouched behind a half-collapsed stone wall with Huther and a Vale knight named Sir Jeremy. He tried to steady his breathing, controlling the faint tremor in his left hand's grip on the sword's hilt. He wasn't young anymore, and ambushes reminded him of old battles, old mistakes. Yet he had to remain vigilant. Hours passed with no sign of movement. The hush became oppressive. Jaime wondered if the raiders had chosen a different target. Then, perhaps an hour past midnight, he heard it. Soft footfalls, the crack of a branch. He peered around the wall. Silhouettes flitted across the outer fields. 5, 6, more than 10. They moved quickly, efficiently, forming a perimeter around the village. Jaime's pulse quickened. This was it. The raiders approached like ghosts, clad in dark leather and cloaks, some with short bows, others with axes or swords. In the gloom, no sigils were visible. At a signal from someone in their ranks, they fanned out. A few advanced toward the storehouse, likely to burn it. Jaime motioned to Huther, who passed the silent command down the line. The ambushers waited, hearts pounding in unison. Moments later, a spark of light flared. The raiders were preparing torches. Then from the ridge, an arrow whistled. It struck the torchbearer square in the shoulder, causing him to scream and drop the torch. The night exploded into chaos. More arrows rained down. The raiders shouted warnings, some trying to scatter. Jaime gave the signal and the hidden soldiers burst from their cover, charging. He leapt over the wall, sword in hand, feeling the surge of adrenaline course through him. The raiders fought back fiercely, but they'd been caught off guard. Steel clashed in the darkness. Jaime parried a wild swing from a bearded man, stepping aside to land a strike that knocked the man's weapon free. Around him, the Vale knights pressed in, while archers fired from above. Amid the chaos, he noticed how organized the raiders still were. Instead of panicking, some regrouped, forming a defensive line. Others tried to flank the ambushers. This wasn't a mere band of peasants. They had training. Jaime gritted his teeth as he clashed swords with a woman whose eyes glinted with dangerous skill. She nearly disarmed him, but he pivoted, using his golden hand to bash her hilt aside. She cursed, stumbling back, and a Vale knight felled her with a spear thrust. All around, the night filled with shouts, the clang of metal, and the acrid stench of smoke when a torch landed on a straw roof. Huther led his rangers through a knot of raiders near the storehouse, cutting them off from escape. Another group of raiders tried to break free toward the forest, only to be met by archers who loosed arrows at close range. Eventually, the raiders who remained began to falter, seeing they were outnumbered. Some tried to flee, others fought to the last breath. Jaime signaled for his men to show mercy if possible, hoping to take prisoners who could reveal more. By the time the skirmish ended, several buildings were smoldering, and bodies littered the muddy square. The ambushers had lost a few men too, but the victory belonged to them. Panting, Jaime stood in the center of the street, scanning for survivors. Adrenaline coursed through him, making his limbs tremble. The night's chill bit at his sweat-soaked brow. Slowly, the fighters regrouped, securing the area. They found 4 raiders alive, wounded but conscious. Jaime knelt beside one, a wiry man with an arrow in his leg. "You're caught," Jaime said, voice rough. "Who commands you? Who funds this?" The man's face twisted. "Go to hell, Lannister." Jaime held the man's gaze. "If you'd rather die than talk, that's your choice. But if you tell us who's behind this, maybe you'll get a fair trial." A flicker of fear crossed the raider's eyes, but he spat blood, refusing to speak. 2 Vale Knights dragged him away to bind him. Meanwhile, another prisoner shrieked as a ranger tried to dress a wound in his side. Jaime hurried over, kneeling in the bloody dirt. "Hold still," he commanded. The raider's eyes rolled with pain. "We'll help you, but you must talk." The man gasped. No, name." He coughed, spitting red. "He'll kill us if we talk." Jaime frowned. "He who?" The prisoner's chest heaved. Sellsword. Calls himself the Jackdaw. Said he'd pay in gold, if we burn the Vale's food. 'Cause chaos." Jaime exchanged a look with Heather. "Who pays him?" But the man only groaned, eyes unfocusing. Jaime cursed softly as the prisoner slipped into unconsciousness. The ranger continued to try to staunch the bleeding. Another prisoner had fainted outright. The only one who seemed lucid was a woman with a broken arm, but she glared at the soldiers silently. The Jackdaw. Jaime had never heard the name before. Sellsword. Possibly a new mercenary outfit forming after the wars. Or an alias for someone with deeper pockets. This confirmed at least one thing. These raids were funded and organized. It wasn't random desperation. He took a moment to check on the wounded among his own men. A Vale Knight lay dead near the well, and 2 others were gravely injured. Jaime felt the familiar weight of loss. Then he focused on the immediate tasks, putting out the fires, gathering the bodies, interrogating the prisoners if any were willing to speak. The next hours were a flurry of grim activity. At dawn, Stonewood was a mess of smoldering ruins and bloodied mud. Yet the surviving villagers emerged, grateful that the ambush had prevented complete destruction. Jaime mustered the soldiers in the square. They looked tired, some splattered with soot and blood but determined. They had accomplished what they set out to do, catch the raiders. Now came the question of next steps. A messenger was dispatched to Lord Arryn, bearing news of their success. Meanwhile, Jaime intended to learn more about this Jackdaw figure. He pressed the wounded prisoners again, but they either claimed ignorance or refused to speak, terrified of retribution. Only one repeated the same half-coherent story. A sellsword leader had gathered them, promising gold if they spread destruction in the Vale. None had seen the Jackdaw's face, always hooded in meetings. Payment arrived in pouches of coin from unknown sources. As the day wore on, Jaime tried to piece it all together. Someone wanted to destabilize the Vale. But who? An exiled lord? A rival from the Riverlands? The possibilities were endless. When Robin arrived at Stonewood by midday with reinforcements, Jaime brought him up to speed. The young lord paled at the mention of a sellsword conspiracy, then quickly steeled himself. "We must find this Jackdaw," Robin said firmly, eyes flicking over the scorched storehouse. "He can't hide forever." "We'll need to track any leads," Jaime agreed. "One approach is to follow the money. Sellswords don't fight for free." Robin rubbed his chin. "We can question merchants, innkeepers, anyone who might have seen suspicious coin passing hands. The Vale isn't so large that a hidden paymaster can stay invisible for long." Jaime nodded, though he knew it wouldn't be easy. Sellswords could travel under false names, disguise themselves as ordinary travelers. Still, it was a start. They spent the rest of the day securing Stonewood, ensuring the raiders who hadn't fallen in battle or escaped were locked up. Others rangers scoured the surrounding woods in case any stragglers were hiding. By nightfall, the camp smelled of burnt timber and the acrid stench of blood. A quiet unease settled over the soldiers. Jaime, exhausted, found a moment to sit under a half-collapsed barn wall, letting the breeze cool his sweat. He thought of Winterfell, of Brienne, of the relative calm he'd felt there. Here, the ghosts of war lingered in every shadow. A Vale Knight walked by, nodding respectfully, then moved on. Jaime brushed mud from his cloak, remembering how once he'd never tolerated even a speck of dirt on his finery. Things change, he mused. He dozed fitfully, dreaming of ravens with black wings carrying messages of chaos to every corner of Westeros. The dream shifted, and he stood in a godswood, searching for something he couldn't name. When he woke, the moon was high, and the night patrol was making rounds. Tomorrow, they'd push deeper into the mountains, chasing any lead they could find about the jackdaw. He only hoped they'd find answers before more villages burned. The days that followed turned into a grueling chase. Heather and the other rangers led scouting parties along mountain trails, sometimes finding signs of raider camps, a discarded boot, a burned-out fire. They'd question local shepherds and woodcutters who had seen armed men passing at odd hours. A few claimed to have glimpsed a cloaked figure on horseback, leading a group of silent warriors. Rumors spread of hidden paths that wound high into the peaks, where the wind howled like wolves. Twice more Jaime's forces managed to ambush small bands of raiders, each fight a brutal clash in the stony ravines. The men they captured said little, repeating the same cryptic references to the jackdaw's golden threats. Some had never even met him face to face, only a lieutenant who claimed to speak for him. Weapons and coin discovered on these raiders were of decent quality, hinting at a steady source of funds. Robb and Aaron, now fully involved, rode from outpost to outpost, rallying Vale lords to stand firm. The younger lord showed more resolve than Jaime expected, though anxiety still flickered in his eyes whenever he saw the aftermath of a raid. The Vale Knights fought bravely, side by side with the northern men. A sense of camaraderie grew, reminiscent of how the Vale had once come to rescue the North. Now, the North returned the favor. Amid all this, ravens flew back and forth to Winterfell. Jaime kept Sansa informed of their progress and asked if there had been any new threats from the Boltons or the Iron Islands. The replies came with cautious relief. No new storms on the horizon there, at least for the moment. His letters to Brienne were more personal, though couched in polite language in case others read them. He found comfort in imagining her daily routines, training the garrison, advising Sansa, perhaps visiting the Godswood. Weeks passed and the hunts through the mountains wore down both sides. The raiders became more elusive, avoiding pitched battles. Jaime began to suspect they had a hidden fortress, or at least a network of caves. But locating it in the Vale's labyrinth of peaks was maddening. Each time he closed in on a lead, it turned into a dead end. He reminded himself that he wasn't a young knight anymore. His joints ached from constant riding, and the cold nights made old injuries throb. But he pushed on, determined. Finally, a breakthrough arrived in the form of an unexpected informant, a villager from the foothills who claimed to have traded stolen goods with a masked man in a cave near a waterfall. The villager, fearful for his life, offered to guide Jaime's scouts there if promised protection. Robin agreed, and a plan was set. Jaime took a small force, including Heather, Sir Jeremy, and a handful of Vale Knights, leaving the bulk of the army in a secure camp. They traveled by night, guided by the trembling villager. The path was treacherous, crossing a slippery ledge above a roaring river. Above them, jagged peaks towered against a moonless sky. More than once, Jaime had to steady his horse to avoid a fatal drop. Near dawn, they reached a hidden ravine overshadowed by pine trees. Water cascaded down a steep cliff, sending up mist that coated the rocks in ice. The villager pointed to a dark opening behind a tangle of shrubs. "The cave's in there," he whispered, voice quavering. "They meet sometimes at sunrise." Jaime dismounted, motioning for the others to do the same. He scanned the surroundings. An ambush here could be lethal if the raiders had archers stationed above. But if they found the jackdaw or his lieutenants, it could end the entire campaign. Carefully they advanced, weapons at the ready. Heather slipped ahead, silent as a shadow, peering into the cave mouth. He glanced back, nodding, and the group proceeded inside. The cavern opened into a wide chamber, lit faintly by light filtering through cracks in the rock. A rancid smell of damp earth and decay filled the air. They heard faint voices echoing. Crouching behind stalagmites, Jaime counted 4 figures near a makeshift table, one in a hooded cloak, the others in piecemeal armor. On the table lay sacks of coin, a few weapons, and what looked like a stack of papers. Jaime gestured to Heather, indicating they should move in slowly. If they could catch them alive, They might finally unmask the leader. Suddenly, one of the armed figures stiffened, turning toward the entrance. "We're not alone," he hissed. Realizing stealth was lost, Jaime surged forward, sword in hand. "Lay down your arms," he roared. "In the name of the Queen in the North and the Lord of the Vale." Chaos erupted. The hooded figure seized the sacks of coin and darted for a side tunnel, while the other three drew steel. One of Jaime's knights lunged, driving a raider back. Other unleashed an arrow, striking another in the leg. The cavern filled with echoes of battle as blades clashed in the dim light. Jaime chased after the hooded one, heart pounding. He wanted answers. The figure darted into a narrower passage, lamp smoke trailing behind. Jaime pursued, ignoring the uneven ground beneath his boots. The passage twisted, the walls slick with moisture. Torchlight flickered from the fugitive's lamp. Deeper in, the tunnel opened into a cramped chamber. The hooded figure spun around, brandishing a short sword. Jaime raised his own. "You're cornered," he panted. "Drop the coin, drop the sword, and let's talk." A low laugh came from beneath the hood, a woman's voice, cold and mocking. "The Lannister in the North," she taunted. "You have no idea what game you're stumbling into." Jaime's eyes narrowed. "Then enlighten me." She feinted at him, forcing him to block. The metallic clang reverberated painfully in the tight space. She moved with trained agility, her strikes swift and precise. Jaime matched her, deflecting each blow, though the cramped tunnel restricted his movements. Gold coins spilled from the bag she carried, clinking as it scattered across the wet stone. "What do you gain by burning villages in the Vale?" he demanded, locking swords with her. "Who pays you?" She gritted her teeth, twisting away with impressive speed. "You'll never know." A slash came too close for comfort, scraping Jaime's mail at the shoulder. He retaliated with a thrust. She parried, but the uneven ground caused her to lose footing. Seizing the chance, Jaime lunged, knocking the sword from her grip with his golden hand. The weapon skittered across the ground. She cursed, trying to scramble for it. "Enough," Jaime growled, pressing his blade near her throat. "Surrender." The woman glared up at him, chest heaving. The hood had fallen back slightly, revealing dark hair plastered to her forehead by sweat. Her lips parted, and for an instant he thought she might surrender. But then her eyes flicked to the sword on the ground. With a burst of desperate strength, she lunged sideways, rolling across the slick floor to snatch the blade. Jaime lashed out, slicing her arm. She cried out, dropping the sword again. Clutching her wounded arm, she staggered against the wall, blood staining her sleeve. "You're a fool, Kingslayer," she spat, voice trembling with pain. "All your heroics mean nothing." Jaime kept his sword raised, approach cautious. "Who are you?" A bitter laugh escaped her. "I'm the Jackdaw Shadow. That's all you need to know." She glanced at the coins strewn on the ground. "You think this is about gold? The realm is broken. We're just the beginning." Before he could disarm her fully, her hand shot into a pouch at her belt, pulling out a small dagger. Jaime tried to knock it away, but she plunged it into her own side with a brutal twist. He shouted, grabbing for her wrist, but it was too late. With a ragged gasp, she slid down the wall, blood pooling on the stone. "No," Jaime hissed, pressing his palm against her wound to stanch the bleeding. She coughed, her eyes rolling. He had wanted a prisoner, someone who could talk, who could name the true mastermind. The dagger had ensured she'd never speak again. He knelt there, frustration raging inside him, as her life drained away. Footsteps approached, Heather and Sir Jeremy, breathless from the fight. Jaime shook his head, stepping back. She took her own life. They all stared at the body, at the coins scattered around. Heather's gaze turned grim. "Well, at least we have the gold. Maybe it has mint marks or some clue." Jaime nodded, snapping back to focus. He signaled for them to gather the coin. "Search the body. Search the cave. There might be ledgers, letters, anything that can lead us to this so-called jackdaw." No. They found a few scraps of paper on the makeshift table, coded messages that might yield something if deciphered. The dead woman's cloak yielded a single black feather, tucked into an inner pocket, presumably a token of the jackdaw's moniker. She also carried a small medallion etched with a strange insignia, an eagle's claw clutching a coin, Jaime pocketed it, hoping it might be a recognized symbol. In the rest of the cave, they discovered supplies, barrels of salted fish, jugs of ale, some lamp oil, and more stolen goods. No sign of any other raiders, though. It seemed this was a temporary outpost, not the main hideout. Still, it was a start. They dragged the bodies outside and buried them in a shallow grave, including the woman who'd taken her own life. Jaime could only guess at the fanaticism or fear that had driven her. When the group returned to the main camp near the Bloody Gate, they spread out their findings, the coded papers, the odd medallion, the gold coins. Lord Robin and his advisors pored over each item hoping for a clue. The coins bore a variety of mint marks, some from the Reach, some from the Westerlands, even a few from the Free Cities. This suggested a widespread operation, or someone adept at laundering coin. The coded notes were scrawled in a language none recognized. They sent for a maester who specialized in ciphers, but it could take weeks to decode. Frustration simmered in the camp. They had curbed the raids for now, driving the surviving raiders into hiding. But the mastermind, the jackdaw, remained at large. Jaime suspected it was more than just one person. Perhaps, jackdaw was a mantle for a conspiracy aimed at destabilizing different regions, starting with the Vale. If so, the North or the Riverlands could be next. He wrote to Sansa with what little they had, urging her to stay alert. Days stretched into a tense routine of patrols and searches. Morale began to waver. The men were tired from constantly scouring the mountains, and the cold nights sapped their strength. Jaime tried to keep spirits up, reminding them of their successes in catching smaller raider bands. But each time they thought they had a solid lead on the jackdaw, it vanished. The locals were too afraid or too ignorant to provide solid information. Finally, Robin Arryn decided that the best course was to maintain a permanent presence in the affected areas, building watchtowers and dispatching rangers to patrol the mountains. He thanked Jaime for the North's aid, noting that he might still need it if the threat returned full force. Jaime agreed that a sustained approach was wise. Though he felt they were leaving some stones unturned, he recognized the toll the campaign had taken on his men. A council of Vale lords and northern officers convened. In the end, they concluded that while the immediate danger of widespread raids had lessened, the deeper conspiracy remained unsolved. Jaime resolved to continue seeking information. The coded notes and the medallion were sent to maesters in both the Vale and Winterfell for further study. The jackdaw might lie low for a while, or strike again elsewhere. With a measure of stability restored, Robin gave Jaime permission to return north with most of his men. A few scouts and knights from Winterfell opted to stay behind, joining the Vale's watchers in the mountains. Jaime hoped it was enough. Part of him felt uneasy leaving a mystery unsolved, but his duty as Warden called him back. Sansa needed him to keep the North secure, especially if the jackdaw turned her sights there. And so, after weeks of grueling missions, he led the northern soldiers home. They followed the winding roads back through the foothills, past the Bloody Gate, and onto the King's Road. The return journey was easier, with spring further advanced, the sun warmer on their backs. Fields showed fresh green, and small flowers bloomed alongside the road, a hopeful sign of renewal. Still, Jaime couldn't shake the haunting image of that hooded woman taking her own life rather than talk, or the coded notes that might hold the key to a broader conspiracy. He vowed to stay vigilant, to see if any future raids bore the same hallmarks. If so, he'd act decisively. For now, though, the Vale was calmer, and a portion of the soldiers carried new scars and stories. At long last, Winterfell's gates came into view, and Jaime felt a wave of relief so profound it nearly took his breath. The watchers on the walls called out greetings. Inside the courtyard, men and women stopped their tasks to watch the returning host. A stableboy hurried forward to take Jaime's reins. He dismounted with a groan, every joint protesting. Sansa emerged from the keep, flanked by advisors. Brienne stood to one side, taller than the rest, her expression brightening when she saw Jaime. Her eyes searched his face as if to confirm he was truly unharmed. Jaime gave a subtle nod, grateful to see her again. Sansa formally welcomed them back, then led Jaime to the solar to hear the full report. Lord Glover, Lady Mormont, and a few others joined. Brienne remained close, listening intently as Jaime described the raids, the near-constant skirmishes, and the final confrontation in the cave. When he recounted the mysterious jackdaw references, the coded notes, and the medallion, Sansa's brow furrowed. We'll have Maester Walgrave examine these items immediately, she said. We'll also send copies to the Citadel. Someone must know that emblem. Brienne tapped her finger thoughtfully on the table. If this group has designs on the north, we must be prepared. Guard the roads, watch for any suspicious movement. Perhaps we should also question the merchant caravans more thoroughly. Sansa agreed. We will. For now, you and the men should rest, Jaime. You've earned it. She offered him a measured smile. I'm glad you returned safely. The North thanks you for your service in the Vale. He bowed slightly, feeling both pride and weariness. It was an honor, Your Grace. After the council dispersed, he found himself alone with Brienne in a corridor. Servants bustled past, but none dared linger too close. She regarded him, her expression a mix of relief and something deeper. I'm glad you're back, she said, voice low. He allowed himself a small, genuine smile. So am I. Their eyes locked for a heartbeat, memories and unspoken feelings swirling between them. Then she stepped closer, speaking in a tone barely above a whisper. We should talk, later in the Godswood. His heart fluttered, a sensation both thrilling and steadying. Yes, he said simply. That evening, with the sky awash in sunset colors, Jaime made his way to the Godswood. The wind carried the scent of pine and damp earth, and the branches of the weirwood tree rustled softly. When he arrived, he found Brienne waiting by the heart tree, wearing a simpler surcoat than her usual armor. The red leaves formed a stark backdrop against her golden hair, which caught the last rays of daylight. She turned at the sound of his footsteps, her posture guarded yet open in a way he'd come to recognize as her readiness to face whatever needed facing, be it an enemy or a conversation. How are your wounds? She asked. He stepped closer, a wry grin tugging at his lips. Nothing serious, a few cuts and bruises. I've survived worse. Her gaze flicked to his shoulder, where a bandage was hidden beneath his shirt. Gently, she reached out, hesitant, then rested her hand lightly against the spot. Heat coursed through him at the simple contact. I worried, she admitted softly, withdrawing her hand. He nodded, swallowing a lump in his throat. I know. He looked up at the carved face of the weirwood, then back at her. Every night in the Vale, after some skirmish or another, I'd think of Winterfell, of you, here. She searched his face. And what would you think? He exhaled slowly, letting the quiet of the Godswood settle around them. That I wanted to be back. Not because this place is easier, there's always trouble brewing, but because it's home. Or the closest thing to it I've known in years. Neither are her. Her eyes softened and he took a half step nearer, compelled by the honesty of this moment. That day on the ramparts, he murmured, recalling the night before he'd left for the Vale, when you said you'd feel better fighting by my side. I've never felt such surety that I wanted that too. To have you by my side. She let out a breath. It felt wrong not to join you. But Sansa needed me. And I want to protect her in this place. Yet I realized something, staying behind. My duty doesn't mean I can't also care about, her voice faltered momentarily, about what I want. He dared to lift his remaining hand, brushing her cheek as he had done once before. She didn't pull away. The hush of the Godswood cradled them, the old gods silent witnesses. Brienne, he whispered, each syllable heavy with unspoken longing. We've both lived by duty for so long. Maybe it's time we accept that we can hold duty in one hand, and something more personal in the other. No. Her breath shivered out, and for a moment he thought he saw tears glistening. But she blinked them away, lips curving into a tremulous smile. I've never known how to want both, or if I deserved it. His heart clenched at her words. You deserve everything, Brienne. If anyone in the realm deserves it, it's you. She inhaled, steadying herself. Then, slowly, she leaned forward, pressing her forehead to his. The gesture was intimate, the closeness sending warmth through Jaime's entire body. I'll stand with you, she said, voice thick with emotion. Whatever storms come, we'll face them. He closed his eyes, allowing himself the rare vulnerability of that moment. The Godswood seemed to enfold them, the rustle of leaves a gentle chorus. They stood there, warrior and warrior, each bearing scars, each grappling with regrets and hopes. And somehow the silence spoke for them, a pledge that surpassed formal vows. Time slipped by. When they finally parted, it was only enough to look at each other, a kind of awe passing between them. They had shared battles, nights of captivity, journeys across war-torn landscapes, and now they stood here, forging a bond deeper than any oath sworn to a king. Neither said the word love, but it lingered in the air as an unvoiced truth. They walked back to the keep side by side, shoulders nearly touching, discussing practical matters, how to handle potential threats, the coded notes about the jackdaw, the questions of forging new alliances. Yet beneath every word, an undercurrent of quiet unity thrummed. No matter how many conspiracies brewed, or how many lords doubted Jaime's place in the north, they would face it together. In the days that followed, life resumed its steady pace in Winterfell. Jaime spent time reorganizing the garrison, ensuring that troops returning from the Vale had proper rest and supplies. A few men needed extended medical care from the castle's healers. He made sure they were tended. Brienne returned to her usual training sessions, putting new recruits through their paces. Sometimes, Jaime would watch from a distance, marveling at her skill and the respect she commanded. At council meetings, Sansa reported no new hostilities from the Boltons or the Ironborn, which was a relief. The coded papers from the Vale were still being analyzed by Maester Walgrave, who complained constantly of obscure ciphers. Jaime did learn that the medallion's claw and coin symbol didn't match any known Westerosi house or guild, strengthening the idea that this was a new mercenary brand. The name, Jackdaw, remained a phantom. Throughout it all, he and Brienne moved in subtle tandem, their relationship both obvious and discreet. The castle folk whispered, of course. They saw the way Jaime's gaze lingered on her, how she'd sometimes smile at him in a way she hadn't before. But in the north, more than anywhere, deeds mattered more than scandalous rumor. Most accepted it as a natural evolution of two knights who'd earned each other's trust, and then something more. Occasionally, Jaime would still sense sideways glances from a few lords who remembered the Lannister name too vividly. He ignored them. Over time, grudges might fade or at least subside into tolerance. He didn't need their adoration, only their cooperation in securing the realm. If he ever doubted his path, he only had to recall Casterly Rock and the hollowness he'd felt there. Here, each day, he felt a purpose. One afternoon, as he was surveying supply inventories in the courtyard, a stable boy ran up breathlessly with news that a visitor from the west had arrived, someone requesting an audience with the Warden of the North. Jaime frowned, uncertain who would travel all the way here. He passed the ledgers to a steward and headed for the gates. Outside, a small party of riders waited, flying the Crimson Lion of Lannister on one banner. Jaime's stomach tightened. He hadn't expected any direct contact from his former home in quite some time, especially after the wars. But there they were, 4 men and 1 woman on horseback. The woman at their head looked vaguely familiar, with blonde hair carefully pinned and a proud tilt to her chin. As Jaime approached, she dismounted, calling out with a voice that carried across the courtyard. Sir Jaime Lannister. It's been too long. Nui. He studied her, searching his memory. Then it clicked. Lady Jenna Farman, distantly related to the Lannisters through marriage. He recalled meeting her at a feast years ago, though they'd spoken only briefly. Lady Jenna, he said, stepping forward. What brings you to Winterfell? She curtsied with a flourish, her breath misting in the northern chill. I carry a message from your brother, Tyrion Lannister, who now serves as hand to King Bran in King's Landing. He bade me find you, though it wasn't an easy journey. A flurry of surprise went through Jaime. He hadn't corresponded with Tyrion in many moons. His brother had been busy rebuilding the capital under King Bran's reign. You've come a long way. Please, let's go inside. You and your party must be cold. She nodded graciously, and Jaime led them into the great hall. Sansa was informed, and soon a small gathering took place by the hearth. Brienne also arrived, standing near Jaime as Lady Jenna presented a sealed letter. Jaime recognized Tyrion's neat handwriting on the outside, addressed to my brother, the Warden of the North. Jaime glanced at Sansa, who nodded for him to open it. He broke the seal, scanning the contents. The more he read, the more his eyebrows rose. When he finished, he folded the parchment carefully. Sansa and Brienne both watched him expectantly. Well, Sansa prompted. Jaime cleared his throat, trying to process Tyrion's words. King Bran has received troubling reports of unrest in the Westerlands, he began. Some minor lords are refusing to pay taxes to King's Landing. Tyrion fears a growing movement that rejects the new monarchy altogether. He's asked for my help in mediating, given I'm still a Lannister by blood and might hold sway there. No, I know, laddie. Sansa frowned. The Westerlands in open rebellion? Not open rebellion yet, Jaime clarified, but resentment is brewing. Tyrion wants to prevent any civil war from sparking. He believes my presence could appease some of the discontented lords. He paused, scanning the letter again. He also mentions hearing rumors, although unconfirmed, of a mysterious sellsword force gathering in the Westerlands, possibly linked to the Jackdaw. That can't be a coincidence. None. Brienne exchanged a sharp look with Sansa. So the Vale raids might be just one part of a larger plan. If that plan extends into the Westerlands, we should be concerned for the entire realm. Sansa's expression grew serious. What does Tyrion suggest? He invites me to meet him in Lannisport, Jaime said. He wants to hold a grand council of the Westerland lords to address their grievances. Then, hopefully we can root out any conspirators. He also strongly hints that King Bran might send royal forces if things escalate. Sansa folded her arms. How soon does he want you there? As soon as I can manage, Jaime replied, voice grim. But I can't just abandon my duties here. Not without your permission, your grace, and a plan to ensure the North remains stable. Sansa glanced at Brienne, then back at Jaime. The fireplace crackled, throwing dancing shadows across her face. You have done much for the North, Jaime. Perhaps we can spare you for a time, especially if this new threat ties to the Jackdaw. Our alliances depend on stability in every region. But who will handle your duties while you're gone? No. Jaime's gaze flickered to Brienne. She met his eyes, her expression revealing she'd already guessed his thought. Brienne can act as warden in my stead, he said. She's been co-leading the defense since the beginning. The North trusts her. Sansa smiled softly. I was thinking the same. If Brienne is willing, of course. Brienne nodded, though Jaime sensed an undercurrent of concern in her posture. I'll do my best, she said. Though, if the threat in the Westerlands truly connects to the Jackdaw, we must stay in close communication. Agreed, Jaime said, feeling a mixture of relief and anxiety. I'll send frequent ravens, and if things worsen here or there, we'll decide how to proceed. Lady Jenna Farman cleared her throat gently, reminding them of her presence. Sir Jaime, Lord Tyrion asked me to convey that time is of the essence. He fears that if these rebellious lords unify under a covert sponsor, war could ignite before the crown can respond. Jaime nodded, mind already churning with logistics. Very well. I'll prepare to depart within a few days. I'll need to gather a small escort. We'll travel swiftly. Sansa exchanged glances with the northern lords present. Lady Mormont, who had arrived during the conversation, gave a grudging nod. We can manage without you for a while, Lannister. Just don't let your region drag the rest of us into another war. Jaime allowed himself a faint, humorless smile. That's exactly what I intend to prevent. With that, the room settled into a flurry of planning. Food and lodging were arranged for Lady Jenna and her party. Letters would be drafted to inform the northern bannermen that Jaime was heading west on behalf of the crown. Brienne remained quiet through most of it, but every time Jaime glanced her way, he saw an unspoken dialogue in her eyes. This new mission threatened to separate them yet again. But duty beckoned. That night, Jaime found her in the corridor near his chamber, the flickering torches casting moving patterns on the stone. She stood with arms folded, her face a picture of resolve tinged with sadness. He approached quietly, and she spoke before he could. You just got back, she said, voice low. And now you're leaving again. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. I know, I hate it too. But the realm seems determined to never let us rest. She shook her head, lips tightening. The Westerlands won't be easy. You'll face lords who might resent you for fighting against Cersei, for siding with the North. Some might be thrilled to see a rebellious cause. Be careful, Jaime. You might be walking into a nest of vipers. He reached for her hand, gently enfolding her fingers in his. They stood like that, mindful that any passerby could see, yet beyond caring. I will be careful, he promised. But I have to try. If the jackdaw or her allies are stirring trouble there, it could spread like wildfire. Brienne inhaled, then squeezed his hand gently. I'll keep the north safe, she said, voice catching. And I'll wait for you to return. He lifted their joined hands, pressing them lightly to his chest as he murmured, and I'll come back. I'm not the man I was. My home is here. Now. She leaned in, resting her forehead against his for just a heartbeat, the warmth of that contact enough to anchor him. Then, with a reluctant sigh, she stepped back, her eyes bright. Go get some rest. You'll need it. He managed a small chuckle. So will you, Lady Warden? She gave him a half smile at that, and they parted ways, each carrying the weight of the duties that lay ahead. Jaime spent the next 2 days gathering a small band of knights and experienced riders. Sansa offered him provisions, and whatever else he might need, plus a new set of northern leathers emblazoned with a subtle lion and direwolf motif, symbolizing his dual role. He accepted them with gratitude. On the dawn of his departure, the sky was awash in pale light, the wind carrying a lingering chill. Jaime stood in the courtyard, checking his horse's saddlebags one last time. Brienne approached with a measured stride, wearing her own armor. They exchanged a long look, the ache of farewell palpable. We'll see each other soon, Jaime said, forcing confidence into his tone. In the meantime, I trust the north to your capable hands. Brienne's gaze was steady, though her voice was soft. And I trust you to keep the Westerlands from disaster. She hesitated, then added, send word when you reach Lannisport. I'll be waiting for any news. He nodded, taking a moment to memorize the angles of her face, the kindness in her eyes. Around them, the riders gathered, and a stable boy tugged at his sleeve, signaling everything was ready. With a final silent vow, Jaime mounted his horse. Brienne stepped back, standing tall as she watched him. Sansa and a handful of others were also present, bidding him farewell. He guided his horse through the gates, the small party following in his wake. Winterfell's walls loomed behind him, solid and steadfast. As the road stretched out before him, he felt the familiar tug of uncertainty. The north had become his sanctuary, a place he'd never imagined he could call home, yet now could hardly bear to leave. But the realm called, and for all his personal desires, Jaime Lannister was still a knight who placed duty above all. So he rode, thoughts churning with possibilities and fears. Tyrion's letter hinted at trouble deeper than mere tax protests. The jackdaw might already be sowing discord. Yet amid the swirling doubts, one certainty sustained him, that the path he walked now was paved not by blind ambition, but by a will to protect the realm and the people he had come to cherish. And at the end of it all, he would return to the north, to Brienne, to face whatever new dawn awaited them together.